I'm Dr. Ed Barnhart. Yeah, I have a PhD in archaeology, and I've been doing archaeology for 30 years now. Archaeology is not science because we can't repeat the experiment. All those people, the things they dug up and the notes they took, that's what we've got for the rest of humanity. But then the next time Europeans came, they were all pushed over. Something crazy happened on the island that was probably triggered by this European contact. Does this represent an Andean colony on the island, or does this represent a single boat of sailors that went way off course and ended up there and spent one lifetime teaching them some of the tricks they knew? I toy with the theory that acids were involved, that somehow or another they were able to fuse these things together, that they made rough shapes as best they could and then fused them together with acid. For some reason, those nubs were important and symbolized something to them that we are no longer privy to. We modern people, despite all of our technology, we are as individuals way less competent or creative than the average ancient person.
What % chance do you think that this is coincidence and an accident?
50-50.
Really? Wow.
Well, I love Luke. Luke is smart and passionate, and he reminds me a lot of myself when I was his age. Just kind of like adventure. Put me in, coach.
Yep.
He's that sort. I like him very much, and I'm enjoying working with him. In fact, right as we're speaking right now, he should be arriving to the Maya site of Bonampak, where these fantastic murals are inside this one miracle of preservation temple. He should be bringing a group for Maya Exploration Center up that temple about now.
Nice. And where is that located?
That's in Chiapas, Mexico.
Okay.
So pretty close to the border of Guatemala.
Okay. Very cool. Well, do you want to give a little bit of a background / introduction on who you are and what you do?
Well, I'm Dr. Ed Barnhart. I usually don't use the doctor thing in casual conversation, but we're in this context. So, I have a PhD in archaeology, and I've been doing archaeology for 30 years now. And most of it has been in Central America, but I've been all over the place. I've done a lot of work in South America. At the start of my career, I was just another shovel bum digging for Texas Highway Department. And I've done some things in Southeast Asia that I love right now. I'm also working in Easter Island. I'm trying to finish a map that I started years ago, and then things changed around there. I had different projects. I'm hoping to get back to finishing this map for the local people, not for the country of Chile, though I always feel like everything I do is, for world patrimony, but I will put it in the hands of the local Rapa Nui people. So they will own the newest, best map. It's at least my goal.
Okay. And what is it about the new map that is going to be different? It's not, the place isn't mapped out yet, or what?
It's really not.
Okay.
You'd be surprised.
Okay.
But, guys like me have just paraded through that island for decades now, and we just focus on those giant statues called moai, the moai and the ahu. And so when I first approached the new organization of the Rapa Nui people called Mau Hanua, after something like over 100 years, Chile finally gave the indigenous people control over their own patrimony, so they could control the ruins of their ancestors. And I wrote them a letter with kind of my heart on my sleeve, just saying, look, I know that the best map is the property of Chile, and you have to ask for access from it. And even that just shows dots where archaeological sites are. I'll make you a map that shows, we'll actually look for the villages this time. Forget about the moai. Those have already been mapped a ton of times. If you guys do get the right to have your island back, you don't want to build over your ancestors' territory and their houses. And nobody's ever done a study that's actually looking for the houses and looking for, there's these neat garden plots called manavai Yeah, there's the island right there. They're all over the place. I've mapped in on our first season. We kind of did, if you're looking at this map from Arroy, there you see the little blue dot there. That is the crater where all of the moai were carved from, and there's over 1,000 on the island. Not just a few like you see on the internet. There's 1,000 of them. But we did a big chunk of the kind of light green. We got most of that done, but I really want to get like over here to the left. That's the town. We haven't even messed with that yet. So I've got a lot of the island to finish, but it's a very doable task. Look at our mile bar there. It's about 12 miles across by 9. It's not a big place at all. But yeah, I hope to give the Rapa Nui people a map that they could actually use to see where their villages were and where the houses and evidence of their ancestors are. Because I know from talking to them that those buildings have a spirit. They are the, manifestation of their ancestors. They don't want to destroy them any more than I want to see them destroyed. And so they need a map to be able to plan.
And what's the best estimate in terms of the history of Rapa Nui and the age of it and who was inhabiting it at what point in time? Like these houses, when would they have existed?
Disappointingly young.
Okay.
from a let's find something amazingly old kind of perspective.
Yeah.
600 by 600 CE, we're sure that the island is inhabited. There are hints that might go a couple hundred years earlier, but at this point we've gotten hundreds of carbon-14 dates from all sorts of contexts around this tiny island. I find it highly doubtful that we're going to see anything significantly earlier. So we go from about 600 CE, we see them inhabit the island, turn into 9 to 12 villages, and then start this crazy competition in who has the most moai in their village. That's how they ended up with 1,000 moai on the site. It was a kind of a Lord of the Flies situation. They inhabited the island, but they were so far away from the rest of Oceania and Polynesia. They got isolated and they did their own thing. You can see that the ahu platforms that the moai stand on, and even the moai themselves, are part of a Polynesian tradition. Like tikis are not that far off of what moai are. Moai are just like mega tikis. But they started that up, and then somewhere in the 1500s is when the first Europeans came. And the very first Europeans saw the moai standing up. But then the next time Europeans came, just a few decades later, they were all pushed over. Something crazy happened on the site on the island that was probably triggered by this European contact. We don't really know what happened, but they went nuts and they pushed down all of the ancestor statues. The local people say that a huge war broke out, that it was just chaos, village against village, and for years people just hid their families in caves, and they were just at each other's throats for a generation. We don't, archaeology doesn't detect that all that well. There's one of those fallen over moai. They pushed them all down.
Wow.
But then they somehow or another got themselves back together. They got to a new normal that involved a ceremony called the Birdman competition. I don't know if it was once a year, maybe it was once every couple years, but they would have this competition where each village would send their strongest guys to participate in this competition. And they'd have to jump off a cliff, swim out through shark-infested waters out to a little island. There they would get an egg from a newly laid egg from a certain kind of bird that comes there seasonally. And so when the first eggs had come out, that's when the Birdman competition had happened. So they'd get this egg and they'd have to get back to the the bigger island, and up on top of a cliff at a place called Orongo. And the first guy to show up with an unbroken egg, his village got to make the allocation decisions for the next year. So very limited resources, but the strongest village got to make the choices.
And how many villages were on Rapa Nui?
At least 9, perhaps 13, 14.
Okay.
That's something they don't really know. And archaeology has never even really tried to figure it out because we're obsessed with the Moai. That's what I'm going to try to do.
And so these are like, and that's why you're mapping it out to say, hey, where these villages were, where people lived, what they were doing.
Right. I'm hopeful that a settlement pattern survey will see some sort of, density, epicenters, and less, or more dispersed population towards the next village, and perhaps somewhere in between we can paint rough lines. It's of great interest to the Rapa Nui people. It was funny when we made the first part of the map. It's a very small place. There are like 10,000 people on the whole island, and about half of them are Rapa Nui people. But they're so far away, they have their own little local television and news. And I had the TV on in my hotel room, and they were talking about that there are archaeologists trying to figure this out on the island. And there was a whole town meeting about who's who, who's from whose village, and if we do figure out where those villages are, does that mean that those people now own that chunk of the island? It's kind of a sticky wicket. I don't want to get involved in the politics. In fact, the reason I haven't been back for so long is really, frankly, politics on the island.
Okay. So the Spanish came in the first time in the 1500s or the 15th century?
I think it was actually a Dutch ship that went there first.
Oh, okay.
Rogwin, I think, was the captain. And I think it was right at the very start of the 1500s.
And so they reported, they wrote down and brought back the information that all of the Moai statues were standing at that point in time, and then they came back 20 years later and found that everything had been pushed down and the place was in a complete state of chaos?
More or less, yes. I'm not sure whether it was 20 or it was somewhere in a matter of decades.
Okay.
And there were drawings and paintings of the Moai standing up with those funny little red hats, a number of them from the first and I think a second expedition. But then there was a period of time where there were no Europeans contacting it, that we know. Pirates don't journal.
So how do we know? How do we know the statues that they weren't just drawn, standing up, and that they actually had been pushed down, prior to that?
That's a good point. I mean, that's one of the ails of archaeology that whatever that person records is what the rest of us know for the rest of time.
Right.
But
okay.
I don't see any reason why they would. I mean, if they were destroyed and on the ground, why would they make in the 1500s, nobody was making a reconstruction drawing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it could just be to say, wow, look at this beautiful place, look at this incredible feat of human ingenuity, and just to show it in its, in its peak of its existence or whatever, possibly, who knows? But it's a theory either way, I guess, that we don't know for sure probably what the place exactly looked like when they showed up there. Is that fair to say?
I think that there's a level of detail that we're not going to get to, but I think the rough outline and the monumentality of what they did remains today. So we do have a lot of clues on the ground. We also have the Rapa Nui people themselves have very strong oral traditions, and we at the Western world kind of underestimate the power of oral tradition. There's a lot that gets communicated. If that's your system, you find ways to embed it and to embed the details. And every time I'm there, the Rapa Nui people are all very humble and nice about it, and they'll preface everything they say according to oral tradition. Mm-hmm. But they will go on to say, according to oral tradition, this is our ancestor named such and such. He was the chief of the village of such and such, and this was erected in his honor. Or, this little house complex was inhabited by such and such, and he had a daughter who married this person. They actually have a heck of a lot of details. And there's one of my friends and colleagues on the island, Edmundo Edwards, wrote a great book, a big, thick book that's called When the Island Was a Universe, or When the Universe Was an Island. And he puts in a lot of these oral traditions. And it's funny that, we Westerners are, even though he's written an entire book about this oral traditions, we're like, so we know nothing, huh? Like, no, actually, if we just listen to these folks, I think they've got a lot to say.
Yeah, for sure. That's fascinating. So the best theory that we have today is that the Dutch came and then everybody went fucking crazy, basically, and started pushing these things down and fighting amongst each other. And then they came back, and they came back to a place where they saw that it was in a more of a state of chaos than when they had been there for the first time. So it's almost like it would like if aliens were to come and show themselves today and completely disrupt our way of life and stir people up and and people would just be in a complete. It would throw our worldview into a complete just state of disaster and chaos. And if you're a few thousand people sitting on an island and you're in 9 different villages and you get these people who according to your history, your oral tradition don't exist. That there is nothing off of this island. If you or whatever the stories might have been, then the people of the island at the time just went crazy. Is that kind of what I'm understanding?
That is a good theory. I like your analogy of the aliens. Yeah. You would think, here we are, where the Meru tribe is the toughest one. Some of them are littler ones, and then all of a sudden, something that probably in that time was equivalent to a spaceship rolls up with a bunch of guys with technology you've never seen, and ready to subdue you. Yeah. That's a lot of these early contacts were they'd roll up in a ship and they'd just steal them for slaves in Peru. And so I think that there probably was a sense of powerlessness and chaos, like, oh my God, well, now we live in a totally unpredictable world. And I think that all of the Americas, there are 2 things that are mindsets that we need to understand if we're going to try to understand them. One is that the ancestors and the gods are protecting us. And if bad stuff happens to us, that means that they think we're doing something wrong. We're like puppets on strings. And when bad things happen, it was a statement of their displeasure. The gods, not necessarily the ancestors. Sure. The ancestors can abandon you. The other one is that all physical ailment, all sickness is spiritual. It's a spiritual source. It's not a bacteria. It's spirits attacking you. And so if these initial European journeys started some of the epidemic diseases, which we know they did, and how, an island is terribly open for that to spread to their entire population. You can't get away. That probably completely destabilized them too. When people started getting sick in a way that they had never gotten sick on this isolated island, it must have been a sign to those that both the gods and the spirits had given up on them, that this way of life was not working. And that could have made them disbelieve and disrespect their religion in a way that they'd push those Moai down. Then, the whole structure of society and why we're nice to each other breaks down. And so say the Rapa Nui, there was a generation of people who all hid in caves. There are lots of little bitty caves all over the island. And my friends there have said that people would just hide their family in this cave and they'd go out to forage for things, come back to the cave. We see lots of weapons and things around. The archaeology is full of obsidian type weapons. So archaeology can at least back up that there were weapons.
Okay. What about you mentioned the carbon dating and that there's been over 100 instances where the carbon dating has come back consistently. Like how is that done? And is there any chance whatsoever that could be somehow incorrect?
Oh, absolutely. carbon-14 dates, samples are infamous for being contaminated. Usually they don't turn up to be something, terribly off, but it can happen. A lot of it is burned organics. So, if we had something that was made of wood that was, much older, maybe we could get fooled by that.
And, where are they taking the samples from?
Generally speaking, they'd be coming from like the base of houses. There's these elliptical houses made of stone. Our favorite places to find dates are in the interior construction of a building. That way we can say, okay, based on this was found in the interior enclosed walls here, and it was a burned chunk of wood. And so we know that was part of the construction fill of this building, and we can tie this building to that date. So those are the best contexts, either in the foundation of a building or in the walls itself.
Yeah. So no doubt that there were people living there at that period in time. I mean, we know that, but I guess the question probably for a lot of my audience is, okay, well, that's great. We know that we have these structures and they were dated, and that's probably accurate, but is it possible that there was people on this island, thousands of years prior to that the structures aren't there anymore? There's nothing to carbon date. Maybe could the statues have been a part of that prior group of people that were there? I mean, have the statues been dated?
No, I don't think we can date the statues.
Okay.
But we do know that they all came from the same quarry. We see, dozens of them there. It is entirely possible that some kind of human population was on the island much longer ago. It's a little bit more of a trick than saying, we moved from Colombia to Chile because you can walk there. This thing is ridiculously far away. It's like 5,000 miles away from South America and almost that distance to like New Zealand. There are little islands, like the closest one I think is about 1,000 miles away, Pitcairn Island. But it is in the middle of nowhere. So if people were there 10,000 years ago, we also have to say they were awesome sailors.
I mean, during the Ice Age, with glaciers covering much more of the northern hemisphere, that would have been, that band around the equator is prime real estate for traveling. If you did have some sort of a group of people, not saying a global civilization necessarily, but I'm saying just some group of people that had advanced to some level of technology where they could make sophisticated boats and had the ability to sail and could use the astronomy to navigate themselves and whatnot. It's like, why is that a stretch of the imagination?
I don't think it is, and I agree and acknowledge that a lot of that, especially seafaring archaeology, is going to be just hard to find. Yeah. So, I like the SETI statement, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. That's an important credo to always pay attention to. And archaeology is a very blunt tool. If we can't find things that didn't perish, well, we're stuck in theory zone, which is what we're discussing right now. That should remain on the table until we can definitively disprove it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's theorizing. But, as an archaeologist, I want to always try to be clear to the audience that I would talk to on a professional level that, this is what we're pretty darn sure we know. And these are fun theories that we're trying to find ways to test. And some of my favorite theories, I just can't think of a single way to test them. So they're going to just stay there in what if land.
Yeah, it's difficult when you go back too far in time to really, to say much of anything with any kind of, definitiveness.
When it comes to Easter Island, it's such an interesting part of the world. It's actually way south of the equator. So, none of that Ice Age stuff affected Easter Island, I don't think, at all. When you look at Easter Island, I can't even believe it's there. Yeah, here we go with this, like, You may be able to find, Ryan, something about I don't even know what words we'd use, but what Easter Island is the very tippy top of a 6,000-foot volcano. So like the landform falls off like a mountain. Literally, it's an underwater mountain. So I mean, we're talking about thousands and thousands of feet. Just like Hawaii. Everybody understands Hawaii better. You know, we understand Hawaii over to Midway as a series of tippy top parts of extinct volcanoes. Some of them not extinct. They have this island is dominated by 3 big volcanoes. Most of the land is volcanoes with no archaeology on it. There's some of our friends. Those guys are buried, by the way, and not man-made. You see the gentle slope of the land. Yep. That's just rainfall, and mud and soil depletion from the top, eroding from the top of the crater that they're next to. There's kind of a neat little spot there showing how deep it is. None of their volcanoes are active, thank goodness. They're all dormant.
When was the last time that it was active?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, but I think that to call something extinct, geologists say that it hasn't shown any activity in over 10,000 years. I think that's the mark.
Okay.
I could be wrong about that, but I think all 3 of theirs are classified as extinct.
Yeah, one of the more interesting things, you were on Graham Hancock's 2nd season of Ancient Apocalypse in the Americas, and really, really cool. I want to get into the Maya calendar and the math, the system of math that they use. It's fascinating for me. But one of the interesting things that Graham brought up was banana plant, like the banana tree being found, and ancient bananas being found on Easter Island. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I mean, the whole collection of things that they were farming there had to come from somewhere. There was the banana, there was taro. Those ones would have come more towards from Southeast Asia direction. But then there's sweet potatoes, and I'm blanking on another one, but they're definitely things that we connect to South America. So, I mean, agriculturally wise, it does appear that there's contact on both sides, which is not surprising. DNA studies have been showing that the Mapuche people in Chile are genetically connected to the people in Easter Island, the Rapa Nui people. That's fascinating. There's a lot we don't know.
Yeah, there is, for sure. Yeah.
Hey, Graham's thing on Easter Island, I loved it. I loved the quality of the production, his team. I got to meet those folks, just the most professional, creative folks you could hope to work with, and the proof's in the pudding. The cinematography is fantastic, and through that Easter Island one, I was so excited that Graham was talking to Rapa Nui people, and there they were, just like I was just saying. In our oral tradition, it's this, that, and he's listening to them for minutes on end of the show, and he's talking about their ancestral traditions and their explanation. And I was like, oh, that's so nice that he did that. Somebody's finally listening to him. But then the very next scene, he's like, but what if they're wrong? What if it is much, much older? Like, oh, come on. Did you actually do them like that? You just asked their opinion and then just tossed it aside?
Yeah.
That sucked.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I thought that was a fascinating conversation.
Ginger, maybe? That's another. Sweet potato, for sure. That's not from Asia's side. That is from America's side.
Right. And that's pretty interesting, like I guess the wall there as well, that wall that looks exactly like the walls.
It's called Vinapu.
Yeah.
With a V, Ryan, Vinapu.
And we find the same exact style in South America, in Cusco Valley, all over the place. And it's like what is what's the explanation for that?
Well, I don't think we have
it's one of the hardest stones.
We have theories, not necessarily explanation. It is the same stone from the rest of the island. I've stood there and looked at it. I've walked around that thing a good bit of time. It really does look very like Inca or perhaps Tiwanaku age architecture. I think that the carbon-14 things that come out of that, and I could be off by 100 years here, hover around 1000 AD, which would put it before the Inca, The Inca really didn't get rolling as a civilization until maybe mid 1200s. So it's earlier than that, but so's that kind of beautiful fit together technology. Pumapunku in Tiwanaku has it, and that's that's of course at 12,000 feet next to Lake Titicaca. That's pretty far from even the start line to start sailing to it. But that Pumapunku dates to maybe 500 to 1,000 CE, so that would be contemporary. Is that Vanapu? That looks like that's one angle of it. See how tight? No mortar whatsoever. Huge blocks, perfectly put together. For my money, there's no question that there was contact. The question remains: what was the extent of that contact? And does this represent a Andean colony on the island, or does this represent a single boat of sailors that went way off course and ended up there and spent one lifetime teaching them some of the tricks they knew, and then it was done? Because there's not a ton of that. That's the only example on the island. All of the other moai, of which there are dozens, ahu, the stands that they stand on, are of a different kind of construction. It's a one-off. And I, as an archaeologist, I don't like enigmas. I'm looking for patterns. Right. Enigmas are probably misleading us.
Yeah. So what are the possible? So it's basalt, right? So that wall is made out of one of the.
Yeah, I'm a terrible geologist, but I think they are all basalt.
Yeah, that wall is definitely basalt, and that's one of the hardest stones on the planet, of course. And it's like a 7, I think, on the Mohs scale. And it's the statues. The Moai statues are volcanic ash, right? So much softer, easy to chisel away and to cut. So it's like, and Ryan's showing.
You can actually see they're doing it with like digging sticks, right. Like hardened digging sticks.
Easy to do, but doesn't work on basalt. So it's like,
no.
Where does that? How is that even possible? If it's not. If the dating is right, it's just that one for me jumps out as like, and Ryan's pulling up the, Sacsayhuaman, same thing. Looks like it was done by the same people, or the same technology at least.
These little chinking stones that just make the fit perfect. Those are amazing. And it is interesting that they're in all sorts of places. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, where is the line between, diagnostically complicated and unique, and that has to be diffusion versus independent invention? Like, none of us make the argument that because Japan has the earliest ceramics that everybody on the planet learned ceramics from the Japanese. That's an independent human invention in various parts of the world, and it's fascinating and mysterious, and we could ask the questions. Well, how did the whole world figure this out? Same thing we could say with pants and houses, things like that. So which one? How to determine what has to be diffusion and what could be human independent invention? That's a wiggly line.
Yeah, it's tricky. I guess the thing that separates these walls to me from things like pants and houses and ceramics, is that we know how pants and houses and ceramics are made.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah,
good point.
Yeah.
No, we do know how these things are made. At least we have a rough idea
on the lack of mortar,
I do.
The basalt.
Okay, on that particular point, how they fit them together.
Yeah.
We don't know how they did that.
Yeah.
How they moved huge rocks, I think we have a better idea. How they fit them together like that. That is amazing. Mm-hmm. But I choose to look at it not that I just think that we modern people are still not understanding the brilliance of these ancient people.
For sure. Yeah.
I don't think it was magic. I don't think it was extraterrestrial. I think we modern folks are not as smart as them. And we're yet to figure it out.
Yeah, I think, a lot of people like that I talk to are just they're attempting to keep an open mind, to like, how could this have possibly been done? And it's not, and I think, a lot of people, when we recognize that there's no known, we don't know how it was done, a lot of people are like, well, that doesn't mean it's aliens, that doesn't mean it's magic, and of course it doesn't. And nobody's saying that, it's just, I think if there is a point, the point is let's keep an open mind, and that's why I love you and your work so much. Is because you're one of the more open-minded people out there. That's like, okay, you talk about everything in terms of how we think that what we know, what we think that we know, but you recognize that we don't know everything, and that we're kind of piecing together different things, and that we're just making our best theories and our best assumptions on what we think we know. And that's what I really appreciate about you and your work, and the way that you carry yourself and conduct yourself, as you explore some of these incredible ancient mysteries. But for me, yeah, it's like, no, of course we're not going to jump to extraterrestrials. Of course we're not going to jump to something that, was just magic, or something that we but it's like.
But if we did jump there,
yeah,
that would cause a lot of clicks, wouldn't it?
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
I mean, that's I'm joking around. Yeah. There's a certain portion of folks that are absolutely sincere in their, theorizing and desire. There are other folks who are making a buck.
For sure.
And it's also hard to tell them apart sometimes these days.
Yeah. I mean, ancient aliens, but they're essentially they're asking questions. Of course, you're a part of that show.
Yeah. Disclaimer: I've been on that show 23 times.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So, I think we just got to be open to, like, what are the possibilities? Could a lot of this stuff be a lot older than we think it is, And if there's,
I for one sure hope so.
I hope so too. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just I feel like we don't know much about anything, and a lot of people oftentimes speak in terms of, like, no, impossible, can't be done, or yes, 100%, this is how it was done. And those are the people, regardless of what side they're on or what their belief is, because a belief or a negative belief is the exact same thing. It's the exact same thing. To say 100% I know how this was done, or to say 100% it wasn't done this way, is a belief. We really don't, we're guessing. That's all. None of that's not reality. So keeping an open mind and being able to say, I don't know. I think that's a part of the brilliance of, I think a lot of, what you talk about, because you're willing and open to say, we think, this is how it was done, but shit, man, what, it could be 100 different things that we're just not thinking of. And for me, those walls are one of those big ones that's like, gosh, that's a huge mystery. And to just try to keep an open mind on, who did it, when did they do it, how did they do it? Those are the questions. It doesn't feel like we really know the answer to that.
I agree. We don't know the answer. I toy with the theory that acids were involved, that somehow or another they were able to fuse these things together, that they made rough shapes as best they could and then fused them together with acids. I still haven't been able to prove it. I'm not the first one to suggest it, but in the past there have been silly theories like, they peed on them. No, that's not going to do it. That's we're talking about andesite here. But I wonder whether, when we finally figure it out, whether acids aren't going to be part of it. I tried to start a project in Cusco with the walls.
I'm with you. I think there's a good likelihood of acids being
so many things, gosh, why don't we test them? Even, I guess sometimes people think, oh, you're an archaeologist. Why don't you just go tell them, use your authority? And, like, excuse me, Mexico, I'm going to do some DNA analysis here. Step aside. That's not how it works. I am just as frustrated as, a lot of your audience, that there's things like, why don't we just take a sample from the seam of that wall and do some neutron activation? I mean, $750, I got it. I actually have guys waiting in University of Washington. If I can just get them samples from between some of these Inca walls, they will test for me whether there is any evidence of acids. And they were saying that if it was something like, my latest theory is that hydrofluoric acid could be used, because you can transport that in pieces safely. And then when you mix fluorite and hydrochloric acid, you turn into HF, that stuff that was featured on Breaking Bad that burns through anything. It's a theory, but they said, for sure if it's that, we would detect it in there. But I asked Cusco's city manager, and he was just like, go away, gringo.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. So there's no legal way to get samples there.
Well, I want to do it legally, right?
Yeah.
What I really need to do is get a relationship with a Peruvian archaeologist from one of the universities. There aren't really many that are state archaeologists there. I need to get somebody in the country. I need to partner with somebody who would be willing to help me get through that red tape.
Because when you look at this, and for people that don't really know what we're talking about.
Oh, there's a really good one. That one's I know right where that is. That's the Palace of Inca Roca.
Right. Yeah, I took a bunch of video.
You've been there, huh?
This is your video? This is my video. Yeah. I took a bunch of video. I think this is my video. Ryan will have to tell us, but looks like my wife's hand. Okay. I took a ton of video because it became so obvious that all of these walls, anywhere you looked, and it didn't matter if the stone was andesite, if it was basalt, if it was granite, if it was limestone, you see that red tint there. That's exactly what you're talking about as what could be this.
There's some evidence of this reddish brown soil. They found it specifically in between the stones at Machu Picchu.
Right.
But also from one rock to another, doesn't that look like troweling? Like if you were gonna make a brick wall and you've got your seams and you use your trowel to cut the deep incision. We call it pillowing in archaeology, that kind of form where the rock wall bulges out. But that looks like troweling.
It's everywhere. That orange reddish stuff right there is everywhere in between the seams of all of these rocks in the Sacred Valley. Between Cusco, Machu Picchu, Ollantaytambo, you go to any of the smaller sites that are kind of off the beaten path, and you look to see anytime the rocks have separated, and you look in where the rocks used to be touching, it has that orangish, reddish filament to it, and it's like.
Now I don't know about that. I know exactly what you're talking about. Some of it I wonder is that pigment? Is that lichen? Is that the evidence of this stuff? I know I read a report that was not from Cusco but from Machu Picchu that one of the archaeologists, I think his name was Mormon, he was finding this very, very thin layer of reddish brown mud that was in between them. And that's fascinating. Maybe that's the evidence of some of this. I wonder whether, if you applied it to leaves or textile, would it just disintegrate? There's a place on this particular, you actually have a pretty good one right here. See where your hand is touching there's a darker line that's kind of a lip in front. On this particular building, Palace of Inca Roca, there are more pronounced examples. So long there's that one, the Stone of the 12 Angles. If you go to the other side of the building, go all the way around past where they're going, oh, this is the Puma and this is his sex. Then you go around the corner. There's a place where earthquakes rocked the building apart really hard. And there, the upper big stones fit into the lower stones like a muddy footprint. It's been rocked apart, so you can see that there's a divot where the upper one fit into the lower one, and it looks like it got squished onto there.
Right. Yeah. They all look like that.
Nobody pecked that.
Right.
Nobody pecked that.
No. And the thing, the hammer and chisel theory, which is, I guess, the theory that we're operating under today.
Yes, it is. That's still the prevalent archaeology party line.
Right.
That it was done with hammer stones.
Right. And sure, that's possible, I guess, but it seems very unlikely. It seems
it feels kind of impossible, honestly.
It does. It does.
I had a colleague, he's now the Bowditch chair of Harvard, Bill Fash, said something on a documentary years ago that I always think of. He said, when you're making things for the gods, it's not supposed to be easy. That's a simple but profound statement that doesn't answer all of this, but it does always make me think that, if this is an act of devotion, then it finally makes sense that they would do something that was so the long way. That the difficulty was part of the devotion. That's, trying to get into the mindset of these folks, I think, is the trick.
Yeah.
My old mentor, Linda Shealy, admonished me as a grad student. She was like, if you don't stop thinking like a Westerner and start trying to put yourself in the mindset of these people, you will never understand anything that motivated them. That's profound. I
Wise
think
words. Yeah.
We Westerners oftentimes, we get caught up in this like, well, why would they do it that way? That's not efficient at all. That's not a reasonable allocation of resources. Well, maybe that's not how they thought.
Yeah, this is maybe the vandalism video that Ryan's pulled up. Is that right? Yeah. So she broke. This is 2 days ago. She broke her hammer, or he broke his hammer on the 12-sided stone. Yeah, caused very minimal damage, but
that's just what the Spanish did. The Spanish beat on these walls 500 years ago until their hand was tired.
Right.
Had just built a building over it.
Right. And then
wow, that's crazy. Was she caught?
I think it was a guy,
like a religious zealot.
It looked like a chick there, but I think it was a dude. But yeah, she's arrested, or she's arrested.
Yeah, it was a gentleman, and they did arrest him. Well, not a gentleman, a person. They were arrested, and it's kind of, from what they've been able to see, it's limited damage.
Right.
Like, thanks for the test, buddy.
Yeah, right.
Okay, I see a little divots there, but yeah.
So the interesting part about these, and again, going back to how they were made potentially with acid being a possibility, I'm with you. I think that for me, that's the most likely possibility for how these were made. Is that where you're at? That it's
yeah.
I am too.
And Saskatchewan is limestone. You could do that with even simpler acids.
Sure.
It's the andesite that you need to have something really strong.
Right. But it's the same building technique regardless of how hard the rock is. Right. So it just goes to show they were doing it the same way. Even if it was limestone, they were building it the same way as they were doing with this andesite and even the basalt, that we see on Rapa Nui. But the most interesting part for me in looking at these stones and touching and feeling these stones was where they came together. If you're talking about that you're hammering and chiseling these things so that they perfectly fit and that they're aligned on every corner, and you've got some stones that bend at a 90-degree angle, but where they actually come together, super interesting, because if they were shaped with a hammer and chisel, then you would expect to see indentations on the inside where the stones are now touching. You would expect to see the remnants of this hammer and chisel work, but you don't. They're completely flat, they're completely smooth, they're completely polished. Where you see the remnants of hammer is on the front side. So you see these a lot of cases, you see these tiny little indentations on these things. And
those rectangular ones that you were putting your hand on?
Yeah, those, right. The rectangles, you can see how they would have flattened out the puffiness with the hammer and chisel. And so you see all these tiny little holes, but you don't see it where they touch. And for me, if they're made by hammer and chisel, you would see it where they touch. And that just throws that hammer and chisel thing almost completely out the window. I'm open to any possible explanation for how it was done, but it just seems so unlikely.
He's incredibly tight. There's a set of temples in Machu Picchu. You look at the classic picture of Machu Picchu, and you've got the mountain behind it, Huayna Picchu. Well, if you climb up over that mountain and down the other side, farther in elevation than the level of Machu Picchu itself, there's a place called the Pyramid or the Temple of the Moon. It's in a cave. Mm-hmm. And it's built of slightly different stone. It's more white and it's more crystally. I forget what kind of stone it is, but I took pictures of the seams in between those stones and like real close-up ones. And you can actually see crystals scissoring along the seam like it's a zipper. Like something differentially took the matrix of this stone and left the crystals. This is fused. This is not hammer pecked. That's one of my favorite pictures. It's I did it like 20 years ago, so the resolution blows. I wish I could go back there. I'm not sure if they let people back there, maybe by special permission. Back in the day, hippies would just climb all over that thing, and then at 4 o'clock, the poor guys at the front desk would be like, well, we're missing 10. Let's go look for them.
Right. Right. Bring 9 back. Is this it?
Yeah, that is it.
Yeah, I told you Ryan's a genius.
Hey, nice job, Ryan. Yeah, it's see that's that architecture. I don't know if we can zoom in there or not. I think Brian Forster was just over there, and
he was there the same day I was.
Got in trouble.
He was there the same day I was.
Putting people in like sacred places.
Okay.
But by certain people, people want to bitch about things. But yeah, that's it. And that one, the seams scissor. There are crystals that like cross the seam.
Yeah. It was. Excuse me. It was the. I mean, you saw this orange reddish stuff everywhere between the seams, but where it really jumped out for me was everywhere. But one of the spots was the Temple of the Three Windows.
Yep.
At Machu Picchu.
Machu Picchu.
Yeah. Which is the most unoriginal name that's ever been created for any temple in the history
of mankind.
Actually,
it has a deeper meaning, but go ahead.
Okay. So anyways, it looked like an earthquake had separated 2 stones, and Ryan, you might be able to find this one, but the stones on the Temple of the Three Windows were massive. They were 8 feet tall and 6 feet wide, just estimating from memory.
And the one behind them even bigger.
Right. And these things, where they had separated, I got a picture looking into that separation. That entire wall on both sides was that orange color, and on the outside you're looking at like brown, gray stone.
I don't know whether that. I mean, if they were separated and sitting there for centuries, I don't think that kind of dirt would have survived. And maybe if it was some like oil-based thing, it could soak into it. But I think even then, the torrential rains there, I don't know what it is at all, but I myself have been fooled by lichen in a whole lot of different ways. These little microscopic plants that take purchase on stone have tricked me a number of times. So have roots. Nature does funny things that make me feel stupid and disappointed on regular basis.
No doubt. Yeah, don't feel stupid. I mean, we're to explore possibilities is so critical, and to understand, it's critical that we do that. But
it's important that we approach it with humility too. That we don't know everything.
No doubt.
Oh, I love those.
But I mean, if it was lichen, that's super easy to say this is lichen. Like we test that, we should be able to know that immediately. But you can't scrape it off. Like you can sit there with your fingernail and attempt to scrape it off. It's not going anywhere. It's like it's stuck on there. It's like a part of the stone. I mean, it's so deeply ingrained, and I could imagine scraping it off even with metal. You would have a difficult
time. So it's kind of soaked into there.
Very
it's
much.
Like
it's
a stain rather than a surface thing. Okay, well, I haven't seen what you're talking about. Next time I go there, I'm gonna take a look. So you said like on the right and left sides of the 3 windows?
Yeah, we'll get a picture for this episode, and you'll be able to you'll see exactly.
I'll be back there again. A funny little side story is I proposed to my wife on top of Huayna Picchu.
Okay, all right,
and cool. So I'm always going back there. It's a special place to us. I just brought my 14-year-old daughter and went and took pictures in the same place. So I've been to Machu Picchu more than most places. It's because that's where I proposed to my wife. But I made a strategic error that now anytime I'm in the vicinity of Machu Picchu, if I don't climb that dang mountain, it means I love her less. And so I've climbed that mountain like 8 times. No, the architecture is fantastic. I think some people miss. Oh, there's. That was like right in front of the 3 windows.
This one, right.
Yeah, right. That one, which is the weirdest building. You can see that parts of it are gone, but the size of those are the biggest rocks in all of Machu Picchu.
Right in there. That's where it is. Right in this crack area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right on that corner.
Like in that little guy you saw red.
100%. 100%.
Wow.
And it looks just like the red stuff that you see that we looked at a couple minutes ago on that wall.
You know, if it was acids too, that would be a reason that it was that it could soak
exactly
into the rock.
Exactly. Yeah, that one for me, man, it just feels like the most likely possibility. So who knows, but.
And not every bit of Inca architecture is like that. It's the big special stuff in the center. Even in Machu Picchu, all the buildings are nice, but you walked around there. It's that central area with the 3 windows and whatever that other temple is next to it. Those are the places with the big megalithic walls. Everywhere else has there are some that are more finely fitted than others, like the stuff down by the Queen's Bath and the one that they think is the Inca's residence. Those are nice stones too. Those are what we call imperial architecture. They're blocks that are about the size of cinder blocks, so a person could carry them, but still very finely fitted. But then you go across the plaza, and the stuff that's on the other side, those walls are not so perfectly fitted. So there's a variety. I think sometimes the internet misleads people to thinking that every single Inca building was built like that. No, but the most important ones were. And so when we're talking about acids, sometimes I think like, well, geez, I mean, if that's right, how did they get that much acid and from where? But it's a limited amount of architecture.
Yeah, it would have needed to be naturally occurring somewhere. Ancient Architects has a really good video on where they could have possibly got it from, and it's from like 5 or 6 years ago. But he even admits it's not his original theory. I mean, we're talking about a theory that does date back some time, so it's not as if this is a new kind of a theory, but he did a really nice job of exploring where they would have
So
gotten
what was
it.
his theory? What?
Ryan would have to pull it up to find it. I haven't watched it in about a year, but that basically that the acid was obtained from naturally occurring geological processes. On
the Amazon side, there's these funny little birds that eat these berries, and then they spit acid into a cliffside and they dig nests. That's one theory.
Yeah. This is a video that is worth watching if you're interested in the acid theory, because I think this probably does the best job of summarizing how it could have been done.
We know there's a number of different acid theories, and there's lots of anecdotal things about like the Spanish going through a certain kind of bushes and their spurs melt off. There was another one about horsing around near a gold mine, and they had some sort of substance in a ceramic jar, and they spilled it horsing around, and when the Spanish told them to pick it up, that where it had spilled, the rock got mushy. There's lots of talk of people making stone statues, molding them along the shores of Lake Titicaca. So there's these tantalizing, stories, but nobody's really figured it out. My dad was an environmental engineer and a chemist, and he was always, Ed, there is nothing in nature that can burn andesite. And he's right about that. Limestone, yes, we could use naturally occurring acids to burn limestone. But andesite is so much harder, and basalt, you have to have something. I believed him when he said that there's no naturally occurring acid. But that's where I got onto, okay, well, what's an unnatural acid they could make? And the strongest acid that I could think of that would burn through rock easily, but not other things, is this hydrofluoric acid. And there's actually a ton of fluorite in the Andes Mountains. There's every Inca museum I've gone into has jewelry made of fluorite. And then they're also doing a lot of mining, right? They silver and gold. We know that the Inca were mining that on a major scale. Today, Peru is still mining those and copper, but it's an environmental disaster because the way they release the metal ores from the rock is through acids, and the byproduct of the mining is hydrochloric acid that pours out of these mines and ruins the environment. But there's the two ingredients. Hydrochloric acid and fluorite create HF, which is, heavily guarded in every university that has the right to use it because it's deadly. It'll burn through anything. Did you watch that Breaking Bad show? There's a point where they're trying to dissolve a body and they're doing their chemistry thing and they pour HF onto the body, but it's in a bathtub, and the HF totally dissolves the bathtub and throws the body into the kitchen from above. But that's that. It's weird how you can transport HF in plastic. It won't burn through it. So it'll only burn through certain things. But I think if you took hydrochloric acid, which was pouring out of the mines that they were using, and fluorite, you could safely transport them to a place, mix them, and burn something. And if you did it in just small traces, I think the acid would produce the reaction. It would eat the rock, but with every speck of rock it ate, it would dissolve. And so the reaction would ultimately end. It wouldn't be like the movie Aliens where it just kept going floor after floor after floor. It would eventually go inert by acting on the substances it was. So you could use probably very small traces of this very powerful acid. But this is theory, This is, chances are I'm totally wrong, and someday I will prove myself wrong, which is what scientists are supposed to be doing, right? We're supposed to be proving ourselves wrong, not right.
We should be exploring all possibilities, and the hammer and chisel possibility is so ridiculous. It seems like that's so unlikely anyway for me that it's like, we have to explore other possibilities.
Each rock in that Palace of Inca Roca is like the weight of a car.
Yeah.
So, you just can you envision that, like, okay, I'm going to pick this a little bit. Let's put it down. No, it's not right. Lift it back up. I'm going to get under there. Back.
Yeah.
Okay, do it again. Like, how many times would they have to do that to make it fit that perfectly? It's just,
right.
I know I just said that, effort is an act of devotion, but that's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that happened.
Right, yeah. Well, moving over to Sacsayhuaman, perhaps for a moment, just down the street a little bit. There's just
up the hill.
Yeah. There was a recent discovery with the. Was it a recent discovery or was it not a recent discovery from your perspective in terms of the tunnels that exist underneath the Cusco Valley heading to Sacsayhuaman?
Not a new discovery. People have been talking about them forever.
Yeah.
It's new technology. I've never seen anybody boast that they figured it out through ground penetrating radar, which in and of itself, I'm wondering how they pulled that off. You've been there. So number one, they said there's a tunnel leading from Sacsayhuaman to the Coricancha. Well, Sacsayhuaman is 700 feet higher than the Coricancha. Does this tunnel have stairs, or is it going at an angle? I don't know. Where it connects to, if they're talking about the base of the hill where Sacsayhuaman is, then it makes a little more sense that it might be what they're detecting are one of the underground rivers. Today, the Safi and another river run underneath Cusco. And in the ancient past, the Inca also had capped big parts of it so the city could be above. So what they're saying are the tunnels, at least in the position that I've seen, the new reports that come out, they might be just detecting the passageway underneath the city of the Safi, because we know it runs down the Avenue of the Sun, which is right in front of the Coricancha. We know Cusco. I'm actually, my new podcast episode for next week is going to be all about Cusco. And I'm going to talk about how there were two major rivers that were both capped with roads that both of them they converged together somewhere near the Coricancha, but a little farther down the Avenue of the Sun, they connected, and a huge fountain in Inca times was right there. So they're hydroengineering masters, hydraulic engineering. And people have been talking about these tunnels and caves forever. It's a common theme in Quechua mythology that there are caves. People say there are caves from Lake Titicaca to Cusco and from Cusco to Machu Picchu. And these ones that are in Cusco, people have actually been in them and gotten lost. But most of them, when you really get down to it, are parts of the ancient Inca sewer system. They are not like spy tunnels going from one temple to another. Now, maybe this new one's the one. Maybe they'll finally show us that it actually is spy tunnels, and I would love that. But based on the location that they're talking about, I think it's sewers. Okay. Ancient sewers, really cool sewers, but sewers.
And so this it would have been running from where to where?
Okay, you've been to Cusco and you've been to Saskatchewan. You know how you start in town and then you go to the base of the mountain, and that's where you start switchbacking up to Saskatchewan. Right there, right where you take your first turn, if you look to your left as you're turning, there's the Safi River. And it's coming into a big modern sewer tunnel, and it goes all the way towards the airport underneath the city. That's the one I'm talking about. Okay. And that one we know was also capped with certain openings throughout the city for access. But it was there and capped in Cusco times. Okay. And it was one of many that were kind of underground water management. And I suspect without, I don't think those guys are trying to make anything up or anything. Everybody wants that's a nice Inca architecture profile. That's what the Inca sewer systems looked like.
And we're sure they're sewer systems.
Well, they are water transportation systems. They are, we could call them, they're not really aqueducts. Aqueducts bring water from someplace to someplace that didn't have water. They are managing the water courses of the Safi and the other one that I forget the name of that run through the base of the valley. So it's water management.
They're moving water.
Sewers is, a disparaging comment. I think it was much more than sewers to them.
Okay, so they're moving water from place to place, but these are man-made. These are man-made dug tunnels, or these are naturally formed?
No, they're man-made. I think they dug them into and around the courses of the natural river, which allowed them, in the same way that we do in urban cities everywhere today. We manage and cap our rivers, and not all of them, but in an urban setting, we want to prevent flooding. One of the practicalities of today, I used to be a land planner, and I learned that one of the most important things today is called impervious cover. When you're planning out a big urban city, every place you pave over is an opportunity for that piece of land now not to soak the rain in, but to rain it down on somewhere else. It hits the architecture, and it has to flow somewhere. And so if you're going to make a big, dense urban center, you have to control and compensate for impervious cover. And that's how you end up, capping rivers like that so they won't flood the neighborhoods. But you can also smartly use it like hydraulic engineering. You can take, constrict the space that a river has to flow in. You've created pressure, and then from there you can make really simple pipes that just they start thicker at the connection of the river, and they go a little smaller and a little smaller, and it creates pressure where you can push water uphill. And that's how they made those fountains. It was a section of constricting pipes that had water pressure and speed behind them and created this fountain. Really? But right where they're drawing the lines on these latest reports looks to be partially the line between the opening of the Safi River and where that fountain still is, and it runs right past the Coricancha.
Okay. Gotcha. Interesting. Okay.
Time will tell. Yeah. I hope that more reports come out and we see what it really is, but I've heard this story before.
Would the water have been drinkable? Or is this?
Yeah. I think even to the local folks, I think they're still doing it because it comes out of springs.
Unless it's sewer. Right. Unless they're also using it as a sewer.
I mean, there's sections in the, like the up sections.
Yeah.
Nowadays it is sewer, you're right. It's maybe it starts in springs on the hillside where the poor folks live. I bet you they drink the water. I know when I lived in Palenque, it's after like a couple of years, I could just drink out of the rivers with the guys. Okay. New people that would come would have, diarrhea for the next week, but I got to the point where I could do it. Some of it's pollution, but also in the case of Palenque in the springs where you get it from the spring, it was about microbes. And I just had to be in the environment long enough where those microbes were part of me.
Yeah, cool. What are the biggest mysteries for you in that world of the Sacred Valley or Sacsayhuaman, Cusco, Machu Picchu, like that whole? What are the biggest things that for you, or the top biggest thing that's totally unexplainable that boggles your mind?
Well, certainly how did they fit those stones together? So that's probably number one. But we've just been talking about that. I think also, I don't think we have a good grip on how they moved the stones. There's this fascinating part of the site of Ollantaytambo where it really does look like there's a road leading from the quarry going across the creek and then zigzagging up to where the megalithic architecture is. It looks, you could just look at it and say, oh, that's how they did it, but kind of bothers me that it's like, no, it can't be that low hanging of a fruit. That can't be it. But I wonder how they moved them. I do. And I do think that, again, we modern people, despite all of our technology, we are as individuals way less competent or creative than the average ancient person. I know we tend to look at them as like, simpleton savages, but their everyday know-how, the scope of someone's knowledge and ability to creatively solve a problem, I think was much greater than we were. And I think we just haven't figured it out. There's Ollantaytambo. I love that site. Is this, that looks a little like, are we at Ollantaytambo? Yeah. I just saw, I don't know if we're watching a video or what, but to our right is one of those channeled streams that we were just talking about. And it goes into a wonderful little fountain. Yeah, that stream right over there, that's all Inca architecture channeled. Parts of it used to have caps and they've broken down, but it culminates in this beautiful little fountain area that's all huge carved stones. Really a fantastic place. It's a World UNESCO Heritage Site because the actual village, that's one segment of it. That's not the big beautiful stone. But see how they've those little squares are a perfect example. They're pretty far away from that channeled river. There are pipes that get narrower as they get to those stones, and they actually push the water uphill to come out of those little windows. It's hydraulic engineering. I think there's so many things that the language we choose to describe these sites disparages their achievements. I really, if there's anything I'm trying to do with my career in this lifetime, it's to, just change how we discuss these things. That is hydraulic engineering. And we should be talking about these people and what they knew as engineers and as chemists and as mathematicians and astronomers. These are the yardsticks that we've traditionally used to compare the origins of Western civilization and to the origins of American civilizations and call them lesser. It's the scientific achievements and intellectual capacity that they've always been disparaged through. And I think a lot of it's just a language thing. We just got to talk about these things different. That's not a mound. That's a pyramid.
Makes total sense. Ryan, pull up my iPad for a second. I want to go back to, this is a video that I took in Ollantaytambo. And so this is the quarry. This is where we think that all of the...
Oh yeah, you're up on the top now. To your right are those huge stones.
Right.
Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so they they got all of the stones from on this mountain, right? That's the best theory that we think that it came from over.
That's what the books say.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know whether they were able to actually match the stone to that specific quarry.
I don't either.
Or whether they just chose that one because of its proximity.
Right. So where is it on this image? Is this it right there?
It's high up. It's high up. It's like midway up, and then there's a little talus that I don't see maybe towards the right is the talus. I don't know. Usually I have some little Quechua guy next to me going, "It's right there, sir."
Yeah. Right. I couldn't see it when they were trying to point it out to me.
There was a little talus, and then there was a. It's funny we can't see the creek from this angle, but there's a creek. The talus kind of leads down to the river, the Urubamba. It's just shallow there where you could cross, and then from there begins a bit of a dirt track that connects to this built-up ramp that zigzags like 2 or 3 times up to where the megastones are.
Let's watch it.
And they keep saying like, "Oh, yeah, they just didn't deconstruct the ramp. Everywhere else, they took the ramp off, but they left it here because they were still working on it," which that doesn't really work for me. Again, enigma. I don't like it.
Yeah, it's one of those things. So the rock would have been, the explanation currently today, best theory that we have is that the rock was quarried from this mountain, that it was brought down the mountain, that it went over a creek that is down in this area somewhere, that it was dragged across this flat area and then up this zigzaggy, windy road and then placed. So let's
I think the location we're talking about is just off to our right at the moment.
Correct. So that's would have come down there, and then this is the road. This is that zigzag.
Okay, yeah. There's the ramp. The ramp.
Yeah. Ramp. Right.
And they, we've even got the big blocks laying on there, like they dumped off the giant wheelbarrow or something. I don't know. It feels kind of manicured.
Like
or just totally misunderstood. That's
these are supposedly here because they just didn't make it up the ramp, and the civilization stopped working on this and just left them on the ramp.
Do you like that explanation?
It's very lazy.
I don't like that explanation at all.
It's very lazy.
Yeah. I think oftentimes we're right for the wrong reasons, or I still think this might have potential to help us understand the movement of stones, but I do not like the current explanation.
Yeah. And so then the stones would have been brought up here, but this is what they look like. Like this is how big those frickin' stones are. I mean, that is...
And again, so tight
together. And
there's that weird little Chicana right there that they carved in.
Right. Incredible. And all these are and it goes all the way up, but these are just absolutely
And
incredible.
those nubs are I know you know what, you've heard a lot of talk of nubs.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
What the nubs are. I do not like the whole those were lifted into place using the nubs.
Right.
They're too they're smooth. If that was going to be an anchor point, I would expect it to be more angular, have a place where you could actually secure a rope. A rope would slip right off most of those kind of, titty-shaped things.
For sure. Yeah, one of the best one of the new explanations that is now being explored for the nubs is that they were used used as like in a railing system coming off of the quarry, so that a lot of those like cart ruts that you see that are basically unexplained at this point, cart ruts are generally found near quarry sites, and so the theory is that these nubs would sit in the cart ruts, and that's how these large stones would be transported. At least
just straight, the nubs were the guiding point, but a pivot, but a single point of connection to the ground.
That's the theory. Yeah, that's the theory. Yep.
Have you ever looked at the videos of Wally Wallington?
Yes.
Wally uses those 2 pivot points, And I think about Wally every time I walk through these things. I sent Wally $50. I want Wally to have more cement. But okay, look, we're on almost to the top on Ollantaytambo here. On that wall were some of those nubs.
Yes.
A lot of times the nubs are in pairs. Yeah. For sure. And those ones that are in pairs especially make me think of Wally. Those things are pivot points. And I could see where you could take a larger stone that had 2 pivot points, spin it up there, and then separate it into smaller stones. And that the nubs would just be there. Why would they leave them on the wall as if they're really just like hoists? It'd be like, us leaving scaffolding in front of a building.
Right. Yeah,
there's 2 nubs. There's oftentimes they're in pairs.
Right.
And I don't know whether this has anything to do with what Wally built Stonehenge with, but I would say from a creative, just engineering and physics point of view, Wally showed us that you could move an almost, unimaginably large rock by yourself.
Yeah.
With 2 pivot points below. I wonder whether those aren't keys to moving them. But I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, very difficult.
I think, again, there's probably something we're missing in their mindset. For some reason, those nubs were important and symbolized something to them that we are no longer privy to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't try to scrape away any of that like it's on the front of these, but when I did try to scrape the orangish substance away between the stones at different sites, and it's just a part of the rock. It's like there's no. It
does grip on, but next time I go to Machu Picchu, I'll stick my head.
Please do.
My eye in that crack.
Yeah, good.
I think there is something onto it, but I get tricked by lichen and stuff. Also, roots can dig into a stone like that over centuries and look for all the world like it's some kind of carving.
Yep.
But then it's just roots.
Right.
There's an interesting, that spalling right there where there's kind of like a really thin layer popped off of it. Those are always disturbing too. Like, well, what was on there? That stone is so huge.
Oh my God, the size of that.
Some of them do, like that one especially does look like a brick left undone.
Yep. No doubt.
But I walk around Machu Picchu a lot. I think part of the aesthetic that they're doing is they're intentionally both leaving nature and man-made things next to each other. And they're even sometimes mimicking nature in the whole architectural presentation. Like there's a funny example right there. They love to make a perfectly rectangular block wall connect to a natural formation. If we go back a little bit, or on the back side of this one, you can see where it connects.
Right.
They love that. They love that. They could have easily hammered that thing away and made the whole thing a rectangular blocks, but they did it on purpose. I think that there's an aesthetic where they feel like they want their architecture to look like it's emerging out of nature, that there's an evolution. There's a cool place in Machu Picchu. If you go to, that big sacred rock that looks like it's called the Sacred Rock at Machu Picchu. The Japanese used to go and put their faces on it all the time, and then they roped it off. And nowadays, every time I go there, I see a weeping Japanese person who went halfway across the world to put his face on that rock. Only that one. It mirrors the mountains in the background. But if you walk from this thing, which is also the entrance to Huayna Picchu, the big mountain, and you walk back towards the entrance of the site, there's a cliff wall that's totally natural, and then it starts kind of, as you walk along it, it starts breaking into kind of natural wall shapes, and then it just turns into rectangular blocks. Right. And you can kind of see the evolution. I walk past that every time I do. I'm like, this was somebody's mind's eye vision of showing how Machu Picchu is emerging from nature. I think that's an aesthetic they go for, and it might explain some of these things that look like piles of bricks in the yard. Maybe it's an aesthetic that they're going for.
One of the things that Luke has gotten me really fascinated in is the Olmec civilization. And so I want to talk about the Maya as well, but Olmec came first before the Maya. What do we know about them?
Not as much as we'd like.
Yeah.
Fascinating early civilization. I actually just finished doing a whole new series for the Great Courses. It's coming out sometime in the next couple months on the Olmec. So I just did, 12 lectures worth of thinking about this topic. Like, one thing is that they're not, they are definitely one of the earliest cultures, one of the earliest that created cities. But nowadays we look at it in a more co-evolutionary model. Like, the Maya were evolving right then, and so were the Zapotecs, and so were people in central Mexico, and there was a much more of a cultural exchange than we used to understand. And it's part of it is just the process of archaeology. We've gotten deeper, we've gotten older.
So what is it that separates them then? I mean, was it just one?
My theory is that they really started religion, for lack of, that's overly simplifying it. But a community that is bonded through a shared religion. What we see is the Olmec have this incredible trade network. So we see the evidence of Olmecs all over Mesoamerica. But Olmec cities actually are only in a very tight area of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Collectively, we call it the Olmen. But it's the swampy lowlands. That's where all their cities are. Everything else that we have that is Olmec evidence is evidence of their trade. And so, like, for the Maya, for example, that's the homeland of jade. And so the Olmec were getting jade from the Maya as raw material. But then they were trading it back to them with religious iconography carved into it. So they were taking raw materials from these other places that had already figured out how to harness their resource bases, but they were selling it right back to them with a religious message. And I think the foundations of Mesoamerican religions were really forwarded by the Olmec.
Okay. So I guess my question is, when I ask what differentiates them or what separates them, so religion, being one thing that makes them different, but the Olmec didn't call themselves the Olmec, right? I mean, they were just...
No, we don't know what they called themselves or what language they spoke.
Right. So if you've got a group of people, if you've got people living all over what is today South America and Central America, and they were living in small villages or towns or whatever, or even large villages or towns, and one town would trade with the next town, who would trade with the next town, who would trade with the next town, but they didn't call themselves the Olmec. The Maya, I guess, called themselves the Maya, right?
Nope.
No. Okay. So then, what is it like? Why do we separate them into these individual groups? What could it wasn't it just people living in separate, unique, individual cities and towns all over this place that were just? I mean, because
there are cultural differences that we can identify, art styles that are different in the same way that, Germany has a different language and aesthetic than does France. France is a much more, fashion over form sort of thing, where Germany is very much form over fashion. Those sort of subtle differences also occur in Mesoamerica. Like the Zapotecs speak a different language than the 32 different Maya languages. And the Aztecs spoke another one. They're part of an Udo-Aztecan language group where the Maya are a different thing and the Zapotecs are closer to them. So there's a language thing that definitely separates them as cultures. There's also stylistic things and there's aesthetic things. Like the Maya were nerds. They loved complicated math, and they made this incredible writing system. But the Aztecs never adopted either one of those things. Even though they could have, it was already there for centuries and proved its utility in the Maya world. The Aztecs chose not to use their writing system or their calendar systems. The Aztec calendar system, which came in centuries, really millennia, after the Maya established this very complex calendar, the Aztec one is super simple. I could almost see them saying to the Maya, look, because the Maya start dumbing down their calendars with the more Central Mexican influence they have. So it almost seems like the guys in Central Mexico were like, shut up, smarty pants, just tell me what day it is in the 260-day calendar. You don't need to complicate this. So those were, I guess, aesthetic choices. Is that what we should call them? The cultural choices that they made, even where their borders are. Archaeology, oftentimes, theoretically speaking, we divide ourselves into lumpers and splitters. There are some of us that love to make hairline differences between, okay, these are the Zapotecs, but these are the pre-Zapotecs, these are the Olmecs, these are the Epi-Olmecs. I'm a lumper. I love to see what's in common of all of them. I love to talk about what Mesoamerica is doing. But I recognize that there are broad strokes there in the same way that Europe is a patchwork of cultures. Mesoamerica was in much the same way a patchwork of cultures.
And what made them so if the Maya didn't call themselves the Maya, and you had these individual cities that were oftentimes trading with the cities that were down the road. They were oftentimes warring with the city, fighting with the cities that were down the road, why do we today consider that to be a civilization, a quote unquote civilization, if they weren't referring to their identification was really within the town that they were living in and the leader, the king that they had within that town. But it wasn't as if it was this territorial spanning civilization for them, or at least it doesn't seem to be in my mind from what I understand about them. It was more individual towns and cities that were that were separated by dense amounts of jungle and forest, and the communication would sometimes be friendly, and the communication would sometimes be warring, but we lump them into these groups of people and we call them the Maya, or we call them the Inca, or we call them the Olmec, but or the whatever we label them as, but is that really a fair way to look at all of these people, or is it really more that these were just human beings that were living in separate communities and separate towns and kind of, learning from each other and trading with each other, but also just attempting to survive. Was there really
we could say that about today, couldn't we? I think analogies are always helpful. In this particular case, what we're talking about, I'd point you to our much better known and understood Greek civilization. Greek civilization was a collection of independent city-states. Sparta did not bend to Athens nor vice versa. They both considered themselves Greek, and they were proud to be Greek. They shared a religion, they shared a language, but they were independent and fought with each other. The Maya world was much the same way. There were independent city-states, but they were following the same calendar, same religion, and there were allies and there were enemies. In fact, part of what really blew up the classic Maya world was a gigantic region-wide war that basically was a civil war. There were two camps. There were the people who were following the great city of Calakmul, and there were people who were following the great city of Tikal. And the cities, states gathered around those two mega cities and fought each other in very complex ways. And some of them, midstream jumped team and upset the apple cart. Fascinating. We know so much about Greek mythology. And, I grew up, reading that stuff and dreaming. I think that, a lot of archaeologists are in it because they read Greek mythology and hero stories, the epics. There are those epics for the Maya, and they're just coming to light. There are also these epics for the Zapotecs. So we are really just in this generation understanding those kind of complexities, thanks to Maya writing that, we didn't even know how to read that stuff except for the calendars until the 1970s. We had not cracked the code of Maya hieroglyphics. So since the 70s, and it took us, a decade or two to get good at reading it, we're still not totally there, but this very complex system of independent city-states, just like Greece, happened. And yeah, they were individual people, and they probably, a lot of the Maya did first and foremost see themselves as a Palenqueño or a resident of Chichen Itza.
But isn't it a little bit different than Greece from the standpoint that Greece would have had Alexander the Great? They would have been ruled by one person. They would have had a supreme ruler, and each of these Maya towns would have an individual king. I get it that some of the city-states were bigger than others, and so in this particular case, you've got two big Maya city-states, and they decide, we're going to war, we're going to fight, and so all of the people that are geographically near them are kind of pulled into that and drawn into that war, but there wasn't a supreme leader for the Maya civilization, right?
Well, neither was there for Greece. I mean, you can point to Alexander the Great, and he was a moment in Greek history that everyone unified around a single person, but that wasn't the way Greece worked before or after,
or Rome.
I think that Tikal especially was attempting to become the Rome of the Maya world, and I think that they were doing it with the backing of a foreign power, Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan came in and changed the way the Maya interacted with each other. They were pretty satisfied with being independent city-states. It wasn't until Teotihuacan comes to town in the late 300s CE that all of a sudden the Maya think it's a good idea to attack each other. And Tikal seemed to be trying to create an empire that they were the center of. We see hieroglyphs and art that show the Tikal king going to multiple of these vassal states to oversee the installment of their next king, kind of like the mayor of the town. But it was clear from the hieroglyphs at those cities that they said in hieroglyphics, they said, he is crowned king under the auspices of the king of Tikal. And the image shows the king doing that. Unbeknownst to them, Calakmul hates this. And Calakmul is busy intermarrying their daughters into the bloodlines around Tikal, and creating an environment where suddenly Tikal realizes they're beset by all these enemies, and their hopes for becoming the Rome is gone. And then Calakmul tries to pull it off, also doesn't pull it off. I think that if they could have come up with an Alexander the Great, they would have in that time period, but they undermined each other. They never quite got to unified, but there were cities and times that they tried.
Yeah, interesting. And we know a lot of that history, I guess, or we have theories on the history and the wars and whatnot.
And we have their names, and we have their dynasties. They've got these great names, like there's a leader named Fireborn. I think that one might just be Lady Six Sky from Naranjo. Am I? Nowadays, we're giving them all we can read their hieroglyphic names. So we can say Yakum, Tuk, Kawil. At the start, we gave them silly little names, like my professor, Sheely, named the third king in Palenque's dynasty, to this day, is named Casper, because she thought he looked like Casper the Ghost. We still can't translate his name. It looks like it might be a manatee or something, but we have all sorts of silly names that we're slowly replacing with their real names. I miss some of them, like the guy who's now that we call Fireborn, and it's Siakak in Maya. We used to call him Smoking Frog. I liked that name. I miss Smoking Frog, and 18 rabbit is now Washak Lahun Uba Kawil. Boy, I liked 18 rabbit better.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I mean, and we're getting all of this information from hieroglyphs that are written on stone, essentially, I guess, right?
Mostly stone. Of course, they had tons of books. Now we have 4 of the Maya books left on the planet, but there was a lot of writing there. There's also a lot of writing on painted ceramics.
But it's got to be hard to piece this story together, you know, from really understanding the true history. I mean, history is written by the winner, of course. You know, it's written by one person. I mean, we're only getting a fraction of it. We're getting a fraction of a perspective, and we're attempting to really understand a culture and a society and a historical time period just from such a limited amount of information and data, you know, when and it's just a couple of things written on a couple of rocks, and we're creating this whole like history of you know, and it's our best guess, and I get it's a theory and it's what we know, you know, but it's like like what was the, you know, it's just it feels just as if we're guessing, and it's sort of an incomplete, you know, it's theoretical, it's our best guess. You've got so many people that are taking it as fact. This is how it was. This is what it was like, you know, and it's like people, you know.
Yeah, it frustrates me to no end. I mean, you know, we're all seeking the truth, but we have to be honest about what's theory and what's not. And I totally agree with you that there's 2 layers of it. First, just like what you just said, like we think we're going to understand who these people are simply by the stone monuments they left behind. I mean, if you walked into Washington, D.C. and you couldn't use a shred of paper or anything that you had to understand who America was from the monuments in Washington, D.C., you'd be totally wrong and baffled. You'd be like, well, obviously that's Greek architecture. You know, an obelisk. This is Egypt. And they must be in the direct line of Egypt. We'd be totally wrong about that stuff. So, you know, trying to think we know what these people are from the stone monuments left behind, if you're not recognizing that's a huge deficit, you're full of too much hubris and you should get out of the field. Mm-hmm. The other part is the fraction that we have. I mean, it's a huge, impenetrable jungle. You know, I've spent my entire lifetime searching that jungle. I've found 1 city, which I'm happy to have increased our selection to 1 more. But it's huge. I would say that over the entire huge Maya world that we've actually investigated and excavated way less than 1%. And what responsible scientist would make any conclusions based on a sub 1% sample? You know, statistically speaking, 5% or less is insignificant and should not be included in any scientific conclusions. So, I mean, it's exciting what we're learned, but we should not confuse ourselves that that's the whole story and we know who these people were.
Right. What did they call themselves if it wasn't the Maya?
You know, like lots of places around the world, when you ask them, when people that understood their language asked them, they would say something like Halachwinik, were the real people, or they would name their town. But they would not say Maya is probably some sort of initial contact communication barrier. The Maya word for no is ma. So Maya, I favor the interpretations that say that it's somewhere in the order of, I don't understand what you're saying. No understandy. Okay, so your names are no understandy. Good, got it. Oh, gosh. Oh, gosh. You know, the root problem is who's the authority to say? You know, who's the authority? Is it the guy, you know, in the Bowditch chair at Harvard? Should we all take his opinion? Should we go with the Webster Dictionary? You know, nobody's the authority to tell us what's right. So I can only follow my camp. My mentor was Linda Sheely. She was instrumental in breaking the Maya code. And I I loved her and believed what she had to say. In her opinion, and she was a forceful woman. It's kind of like, whoever's voice is loudest win. She said that it's all Maya, that you got to say Maya, 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 though she had these two funny exceptions, and only two. Mayan languages and Mayan architecture she would allow. Every other context, Maya art, Maya hieroglyphs, Maya clothes, it's all Maya. And I'll admit that seems arbitrary, her line. And nowadays, lots of people want us to do Mayan. There's Linda. I miss her. She was a one of a kind. Funniest woman, cursed like a sailor, terrible Southern accent, spoke Spanish and Maya terribly. But she got a perspective. The Maya loved her. When she died, hundreds of Maya showed up to the ceremony where her ashes are buried looking over Lake Atitlan. And Maya absolutely loved her. They had a name for her up in the Highlands, which cracked me up. She loved it. She was big and kind of heavy set. In Maya language, the name that they all gave her translated to big fucker woman. And she loved it. Yeah, she was like, I'm big fucker woman. This is great.
That's fantastic. Love it. Well, good. Yeah, let's come back to Maya in a second. But I went down that path of Olmec and then got sidetracked.
Just to wrap that one up.
Yeah.
I say Maya.
Okay.
I believe at 30 plus years in the field, I have some authority on this matter, but it'll never be resolved. Great Courses totally barked over me. All their guys in their research department were like, "Sorry, Ed. It's Mayan." Like, yeah. Oh, don't put it on the title. Okay, you did. That's fine.
But so help me out though. If the Maya didn't call themselves the Maya, then why is Maya or Mayan correct?
Exactly. Yeah. It's all academic stupidity.
Right. Okay. Got it. So the Olmec then, I mean, what do we know? Do we even know that the Olmec were the people who created the massive Olmec heads? And
I feel like we do. I mean, there's a lot of questions still out there, but there are fundamental things. I don't disbelieve that they moved those heads, and the reason that the heads are a big part of why they're so astounding and why we're so interested in them, because at the time period that they're doing these things, no one is doing that in Mesoamerica. I mean, not many places on the planet are doing that. And they seem to just start at an 11 and go up from there. Like we do have basic settlements that grow and grow and grow, and monuments that get bigger and bigger. But when they decide to make those heads and the altars, that seems to have very little precedent. It's a massive, unprecedented effort. And, we love those heads, and the heads are amazing. There's, some of them, the biggest one is like 45 tons. Amazing stuff. But they also made these huge platforms. San Lorenzo, the first big city, it's earthen platform, and we disrespect that it's dirt. It would be cooler if it was stone, but it's a kilometer long, and it's 50 meters tall. For a kilometer, a 50-meter terraced building stood there for centuries. What a massive effort. And like when we're talking about everywhere else in Mesoamerica have, kind of discrete villages, maybe something you might even call a town, but nobody does this. And we've just discovered because of LIDAR, there appear to be another over 200 of these giant kilometer-long platforms out there that we've never documented.
So much to learn about down there. It's absolutely incredible.
Part of it is just the environment. I mean, I love the jungle, and I have spent my time there, but I have done my time. I mean, I was wounded severely. It's difficult, and the Olmec area is in the worst of it. It's not like the places I surveyed in the jungle of the Maya. Those jungles are nice compared to the swamps in the Olmec area. I mean, you would get eaten by a 15-foot long crocodile. It's brutal. Even if you didn't get eaten by something, there's some of those platforms. Look, that's the one on the right is Aguada Phoenix, and the one on the left is San Lorenzo. You can see the architecture in the very middle. That one's really blown apart. But that's a kilometer long. Look at the thing down there, 500 meters on the bottom, the scale.
Wow.
Huge. And absolutely huge.
So all of that dirt was just built up.
Yep. There, in the case of this one over here in San Lorenzo, there was actually an underlying ridge that then they built up more of. So the ridge is about 50 meters tall, and the face of it is terraced. But the actual architecture, where the top of the original platform or plateau ends and architecture begins, that's another 10 to 15 meters, depending on where you are on the platform. Again, it's over a kilometer long. Huge undertaking.
Luke was telling me about that the Olmec heads were brought from the known quarry, which I guess is known, and nothing's really known, right? But down a river on a raft boat, and you did some math on these rafts that they were using, and that there's no way that they could have supported the weight of these Olmec heads. What's the story there?
In the traditional look, those kind of drawings that people make where it's a nice, Tom Sawyer kind of raft and the head's floating along and some people are poling along, totally wouldn't work. I had a person who joined one of my tours that was a nautical engineer. And after the trip, he was like, let me do some math here. And he looked at it and he made this wonderful Excel chart for me showing that, even there was an extent in which even a raft that was 50 feet across couldn't really hold a head that was bigger than 3 tons before it sunk. But then he came up with, I actually reconnected with him. His name is Michael Daly. I'd love to talk about this chart he made me. And for Great Courses doing this new Olmec thing, I called him back up. I told my director about it, and he was like, well, let's give Michael a call. And so we really sat down for a couple weeks and picked Michael's brain about okay, how would you do it? And he's come up with this interesting, there is a raft of sorts, but then it's built up. It's kind of like a wooden box around the head that uses, Archimedes' displacement of water principle. And so he has designed at least a theoretical way where we could still float them down the river, but it's not just a raft. I was halfway through that conversation with Michael, just proving the point that it couldn't be a raft. He and I back then talked about, his first idea was well, what if we just lashed big logs around it, but they weren't horizontal, they were vertical. So you really took that water displacement principle. Like if you covered it in logs that were vertical, it couldn't push down in the water enough, just like Archimedes' principle. So at that time, we were calling it an Olmec bobber. They could just bob down the road. But now that he thought about it more, he was like, well, it could slip out the bottom like that. We should probably put a bottom on it too. Now there's the traditional thinking. But his math clearly showed that you couldn't do it with a raft like that; it would sink.
But with enough layers, I guess, levels of logs on top of logs on top of logs on top of logs, you get that's one deep. But if you get 10 deep on there, then there's got to be some.
But it's a river, so you can only go so deep. It's not going all the way up to San Lorenzo. There are tight turns and there are shallow spots, so harder, and also all of this stuff is once again academic because, maybe they could get it to the river and float it, but they still had to get it off the volcano to the river, and then from the river to the top of the pyramid or the platform in San Lorenzo. So, how'd they close enough is only good in hand grenades, right?
Right. So percent chance for you, from 0 to 100%. What is the percent chance that the Olmec heads could be 12,000 years old? More than 5,000 years old?
I mean, I guess I'll give it a 1% chance, but I feel like we've done a lot of good archaeology there. I mean, the context of these things is fairly solid. I mean, we've got, an entire artifact assemblage. We have a big picture. Like I hate enigmas. We do not have enigmas there. We have got very, very strong patterns. And, I see no reason to distrust carbon-14 dates. It's, plus or minus 50 years, but that's not 5,000 years. And we also have the not just the context of the Olmec themselves, which are down in that swamp, but we have all of Mesoamerica. There are things that are older than the Olmec, and they all fit in, I think, a fairly logical narrative.
But but you can't carbon date basalt heads. So,
but you can carbon date the things in the context of the head.
But what if the head was from a completely different culture that existed, prior?
I guess anything's possible, but where would that culture, until you can find a culture that could have come from, that's just completely theoretical. And at some point we need to, narrow our focus, or we're just unproductive. We can't just change rainbows all day. I mean, not to, you know what I'm saying. The trick in archaeology is create testable hypotheses. Yes, there are many hypotheses. Maybe it is 10,000 years old. Maybe they did get it from somewhere else. But how do we approach that topic? How do we investigate? How do we research that possibility?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's different possibilities. It could have come from the Olmec, and you're saying that's a 99% chance that it...
I mean, in my personal experience, I feel fairly confident that it's not, as you pose the question, I do not think it's 5,000 years older than I think it is.
Because...
But of course, I think what I think. I
but
don't know what I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. But the evidence for that is really just because we know that the Olmec we know that people existed in the time of the Olmec. They didn't call themselves the Olmec either. We just named them that. But we know that people existed at the time of the Olmec, and so we're attributing these heads to those people because we know that people existed in that time. But that's it. I mean, that doesn't seem like 99% to me. That seems like, it seems like...
Well, okay, where would they have come from then?
Yeah.
Where else?
So is it because you're attempting to have the answer then? Or because, can...
Well, you pose the question, what if they're older? What if they're from somewhere else, right? Mm-hmm. And the Olmec brought them in from somewhere else? Do I understand your question right?
No, I mean that there could have been
or they were there and these people walked up and found them.
Yes, one or the other. But that's what I would think would probably be more likely, that people walked up and found them.
Well, they're in the case. Let's just take San Lorenzo. We have 10 heads. They are either still up on the platform, or they've fallen through erosion down along the side of the platform. But the platform is 10 meters, and a lot of this stuff is very deeply buried. Like the place that we call the Red Palace is actually like 4 or 5 meters under the current surface. And we have lots of stratigraphic context. I mean, if there's anything that's a core of archaeology long before carbon-14 dating, I think actually Thomas Jefferson is... credited with the creation or just the explanation of stratigraphic method, that in an undisturbed context, things that are at lower levels should be older, right? In the soil. It's from a stratigraphic layer in the context of these excavations that have a whole other artifact assemblage in that same level. So it was moved, if it was older, it would have had to be moved from its original context into a stratigraphic layer that dates between 1200 and 1000 BC.
You couldn't just have the people that were living there from 1200 to 1000 BC sort of move in and renovate the area and call it their own home.
Well, there are layers below that are more like 1600, 1800. So we have a stratigraphic layer, phases of that big, massive platform I talked about being built in phases. And each one of those phases, the smaller version of the platform had a cap. And encapsulated in it was the trash of the day, broken ceramics, things like that we can, and organic things that we can date. We have, long before carbon-14 was only invented in the 1950s. Before that, it was all about ceramic sequences. And we would use stratigraphy to look at, this kind of ceramics is buried in this level. And then this kind of ceramics is buried, 1.5 feet below it. And there's a floor layer dividing them. So we look at the profile and say, okay, these ceramics are older than this one. So if we go to another hole and we find only these lower ones, we know that that's from that date, or that's relative dating. That one's older than this one.
And how many archaeologists do we need to believe, like on this particular story, with like how many people were actually responsible for the data that we're quoting here, that the story is being built off of?
That's a fine question. I don't think I know the entire head count, but I could say in the case of San Lorenzo, first guy showed up was Matthew Sterling, the local village, when he said, "Hey, anybody know where any heads are?" Like in the 1940s, they brought him to 1930s. They brought him to San Lorenzo. So he did a couple of years of excavations. He was a terrible note taker. He was much more interested in interviews for National Geographic that talked about romantic adventures than stratigraphic profiling. But him and a guy named Drucker, there he is.
He doesn't look very trustworthy, does he?
He did. His wife was the brains of the operation.
I'm just joking.
Marion Sterling was like the boss of him. Okay. She was smart, and it was a time when women weren't supposed to be leaders, so she just led quietly from the lab. But yeah, show us a picture of Marion Sterling. You can just see a black and white picture. Just look into her eyes on that and be like, yeah, that woman's in charge.
I guess I just know people,
Not that one. I don't know who that one is. That's like,
if you know people, it's like if they go into a situation, this one guy who's sitting there digging, and he already knows the answer, and he already knows the dates, and he knows when people lived here, he's going to find what he wants to find, and he's going to make it fit into his story.
Absolutely true. And people get married to their ideas, and they start just trying to validate them rather than disprove them.
Right.
But we have Matthew Sterling first. Then the next group that shows up are the two Yale guys, Michael Coe and Richard Deal, and they do another 5 years of excavations. They're the first ones who actually can use carbon-14, and they use a magnetometer to actually find some of the heads that were buried. Then we have a decade or so of Mexican national government projects, and then we have this woman named Ann Cyphers, who just passed away, but she spent 30 years of her life. So, I mean,
it's like 4 people.
I take your point that we are trusting the opinion of less than a dozen people.
Yeah. Okay.
I do take that point. Yeah. It's true. And, I've said it on other shows. I'll say it here again. A very unpopular opinion among my colleagues, but archaeology is not science because we can't repeat the experiment. All those people, the things they dug up and the notes they took, that's what we've got for the rest of humanity. And if they screwed it up or they had some weird agenda where they told us lies for some reason, too bad. That's what we get. Nobody can go in and repeat that experiment and replicate their results. And in that regard, archaeology is destructive. It's not science. I'm a big fan of learn everything we can learn before we ever put a shovel in the ground, because we destroy what we study, and for good.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think it's a wonderful perspective, and it's fresh and it's clear and it's very logical, and it just we don't know what we don't know. And it wouldn't even necessarily be lies. It could be just, they're operating under a specific belief. And you know how powerful beliefs is. Everyone is mistaking beliefs for truth, for throughout human history. And so it's like, if you already know the truth based on what your belief is, that's what you're going to find, and that's what you're going to share. And so, it's, it's one of those things where it's good that at least you've got a percent that, that this could be something different. It could be, I think, like everything, like anything that we look at anywhere around the world, I feel like, we've got our best estimate, and sure, maybe it's 99%. Maybe it's 90, maybe it's 80, maybe whatever the site might be, it's going to be different for each site based on how much work has gone into it and how much we know or how much we think we know. But there's always that chance that we've got this, we don't really truly have a good understanding, and that the history and that the story is just built off of, conceptual mental constructs that we've just built upon and built upon and built upon, and
And strong personalities keep those wrong ideas in place way longer than they should.
Right.
My archaeology's villain in that regard is a guy named J. Eric Thompson. He did a lot of good for the field, so I probably shouldn't have called him a villain. But he was a big, imposing man who had his ideas and didn't want them challenged. That's older years. He looked a little nicer then. When the younger ones, you can see he looks like Herman Munster. He looks like he'll beat you up. There's one of those photos. That guy. Look at him eyeballing you like that, man.
You questioning me?
I'm intimidated from a century ago.
Right.
But he did things like publicly insulted his colleagues that he didn't like. Poor Sylvanus Morley had just about cracked the Maya code. He was talking about the symbol system, how complicated it was, and he was onto the clues that would break the Maya code of hieroglyphics, and published a paper. And then Thompson, his colleague at the same university, publicly insults him, that what an idiot he was to think about this, that this is all just esoteric time worship, the glyphs are gobbledygook, and Morley publicly apologizes for being stupid. And 2 decades later, a Russian breaks the code. But it could have been Morley if it wasn't for his colleague, Thompson, browbeating him into stopping.
Does that remind you of anybody today?
Because it challenged his ideas. Well, some people, I think in today's world, the dogs that are barking the loudest are the smallest.
Yeah, right. I agree.
The people that I truly respect the work of and want the respect of, those people aren't the ones barking about all this pseudoscience and things. And, I appeared on Hancock's show, and I was really worried that some of my colleagues that I really admire and respect would admonish me for it. Didn't happen.
Cool.
Didn't happen.
Good.
The people that I really care about and respect the opinions of, some of them even called me up and congratulated me on being part of it. Nice. They understand what I understand, that we're reaching a curious audience.
Right, exactly. Yeah, cool. So what else about the Olmec is interesting? You mentioned religion. What do we know?
Oh, their art is so, I'm really in it for the art. I've really never found a cool carved stela or something on my own. It's a frustration of my career. I found a whole city, but I was always really in it on the art. I walked past a stela in the woods of the city I found. Must have been 20 times, never saw it. Like, God dang it, somebody found it like 5 years later. Like, oh, I should have found that.
Yeah.
I love their art. And the whole, you see the evolution of a shamanic tradition of people turning into jaguars, and the way they portray the way humans get into that ecstatic trance state in art is just magnificent to me. I love it. And the realism of some of these things, those faces, there's some of them that still the pupils are barely there. They're almost like looking into your soul. The art really, really gets me. But there's a frustration that they were down in this swamp. Of all the excavations and all the Olmec sites that we have, we've got like less than 10 skeletons, and most of those have just been recently found. So we don't have the physical evidence to say who these people were. Now we do a little bit. Like there were 2 that were found by Ann Cyphers in San Lorenzo. And they were DNA tested and they both came back, I think, haplogroup A, which is definitely a Native American one. So those 2 were good. I say that, and I'll say this on your show just for I don't think I've ever actually told anybody this out loud. And again, most of my colleagues that I respect aren't going to give me any shit about telling you what somebody told me. I was up on top. I think Luke was even with me. I was up on top of the giant platform at San Lorenzo and got permission from the community that lives there to go out there, and some of their representatives met us on the top of the site near that red palace. There was a tall gentleman, really tall, especially for that part of the world. Most people are shorter than me. This guy was like 6 inches taller than me. And he said, I'm an archaeologist. I've been working with Ann Cyphers. My father was an excavator for archaeologists. My grandfather was. So this guy, he grew up a generational local archaeologist. And I was asking about, where were those bodies found? I know, he said, well, those were found over there. But you know what? We found right over here, right in between these 2 buildings here. We found 3 giant skeletons. He said they were taller than me. and we found them right here. And I was part of the excavation. And I was like, wow, well, where'd those go? He said, they brought them to the lab. I never saw them again. I don't know. But, I reflect upon that. The evidence is gone. I'm an archaeologist. You got to show me the artifacts. I can't just take a story and be like, oh, well, it's a wrap, boys. But, why would this big Olmec descendant guy on top of the thing just tell me these random lies? What would his motivation have been to tell me the random lies? Is he stupid and just doesn't know what he was looking at? No. He's like a 3rd generation guy. And I've met guys like him all the time. Like when I was a young archaeologist, I'd be like, hey, Chepe, tell me what to do. I know you have been an archaeologist since you were a little kid here. You know way more than me. This guy was no stranger to the archaeology there. He didn't get fooled by floating bones or anything like that. I don't know what to make of it, but I will tell you, and this first time I've ever said it out loud, this guy told me that they excavated 3 giants and that they're gone. Now, who knows what to make of that? Maybe they're all in the basement of the Smithsonian with all the other giants they're hiding, right?
Maybe. I'm kidding. Don't panic. Kidding. It might be true. I was talking to my son about giants on the way to school this morning, actually, and I'd never actually looked into the topic until I started this show, and there's actually a decent amount of evidence that supports the possibility that at some point
I'd say, giants and dragons. Every part of the world talks about myths of giants and dragons.
Yeah, I don't know so much about dragons, but the giant thing. The Spanish chroniclers, several of them, and I mentioned this to you earlier, mentioned seeing encounters with giants when they came to South America, and they, if that was the only thing that they just made up, and that was the only part that was.
De Soto, who landed just north of here, and went for a 3-year kind of reign of terror through North America. He landed in Tampa Bay in 1539, and he died in 1542. He took this circuitous route to all the way to the Mississippi, but in Alabama, he met King Tuscaloosa and his son. And they swore, multiple of the chroniclers of his journey said both of those individuals were taller than 7 foot, that they were giants, that they were big people. Well, the son met them on the road outside the kingdom, and they brought them to Tuscaloosa, who was even bigger than his son. And multiple of the chronicles say these guys were huge. Now, and somebody like that is astounding, and they stand out. Sometimes you make them the king.
Well, we found Denisovan bones that are extraordinarily large compared to regular Homo sapien bones, and we're saying, well, this is and we don't have a full skeleton, of course. We just have a couple of bones, But I mean, people are saying that this is, it's just they had whatever the bone is. It's like a jaw or tooth or whatever the hell it is.
Therein lies the rub again. Again, enigma versus pattern. Because we find a giant skeleton. Let's just say we found a 7'5" skeleton, verifiable context in Americas. Does that mean there were a race of giants?
No.
No more than, our NBA is full of giants.
But so where I was going with this was the Denisovan thing. We do know that through DNA that this was a different species, though.
Right, yeah.
It's not as if it was just a tall Homo sapien. This was a different species, and the bone itself is outsized compared to modern Homo sapien bones. And so it's like the theory is, well, it's just they just had bigger jaws, but all we have is the freaking jaw or whatever. Ryan, can you look it up? I think it's a jaw, but whatever it is, it's
this is one of those that were like akin to Neanderthal, same time period, basically, but a different hominid species.
Yeah, I mean, Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, they all existed at this, for the last couple of 100,000 years anyway, potentially up to 800,000, a million years potentially. But yes, they were all existing on different parts of the planet and the same parts of the planet over that period of time. And Denisovans, I think, went extinct about 40,000 years ago, or did they? And were they big? Were they these people that the Spanish and that other people are saying that they have encountered? I don't think.
Well, how many? I don't think Denisovan skeletons do we have? I wonder.
We have 0 skeletons from the Denisovans.
So that's that's an from a scientific perspective, that's an unreasonable sample set to draw large conclusions.
Zero skeletons, just a couple of bones.
You know what super surprised me? Generally speaking, I was in physical anthropology classes. It's not my bag. I hate bodies, but. I learned a lot of these, like, Lucy is a one-off. There's not a whole lot of them. And I was disturbed by how, what strong conclusions we were making about human evolution and hominid evolution based on such a small sample. But there's one called Java Man, right? And he's actually Homo erectus. And I went to Indonesia. And I actually went to the place where Java Man was dug up. And there's a big museum there. It's in the middle of nowhere. People were like touching my skin because I was white. It was a weird experience. But I learned they didn't just find Java Man. They found 60 Homo erectus there. And there are more in the site that they believe they haven't dug yet. There's a strong, that one made me think, okay, we got this Homo erectus thing. That's nailed. But it worries me when we have, part of one guy.
Yeah, but it's the DNA testing that really that is conclusive that it was a separate species. You can that's the part. It's not just like a short kid.
I don't think that's a revelation. I think we did think that Homo erectus, Homo habilis, all the I'm not a physical anthropologist, but they were all separate species. Cro-Magnon was different than even Homo sapien is different than Homo sapien.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I'm not. Yeah, that's for sure.
I'm driving a little too far out of my lane here.
We continue to find new species of hominids.
What I love is that we're finding ways to test their DNA. I think it was a Eastern European guy, last name Pabo, who was the first one to extract DNA from a Homo erectus skeleton. And that's just, where will we go with this? It's so great. When I was a student, we could have never dreamed that we would be able to get this kind of information out of bones to prove that it was a completely different species. Where are we going to be in 100 years?
Hopefully we'll know a lot more.
It's one of the reasons I really don't want to wreck all these sites before those guys in the future get a hold of this stuff.
Right. Exactly.
Now, just to make a small point on that too, that's not how every archaeologist project has to be. In fact, when I do contract archaeology that was about, making way for development or highways or things, a lot of my project directors there would purposely say, look, our test pitting program says that this site is, X extent. It goes across this 50 meters. Let's just dig 10 of it and leave the rest of it be. Let's just, we're here to collect information, an objective. Is this a unique site? How old is this site? Should this be further investigated or just noted and let go or preserved? And I've been part of a number of sites that we have, with eyes wide open, said, let's not dig it all. Let's leave part of this place for future generations.
Where do we see handbags in the ancient Mesoamerican world?
Oh, there's a bunch of them at Chichen Itza on columns. We see those handbags there. We see them in a lot of contexts. To my mind, my theory, let's be careful to say, theory, not fact. I think, at least in Mesoamerica and perhaps beyond, that those bags are iconographic symbols denoting the occupation of the person carrying them. In the same way, like ancient art, we see a guy that's carrying a spear and a shield. That's a warrior. That is a iconographic or, pictorial indication that this person is a warrior. And I think that we know that there were warrior classes, but there are also priest classes. There are, a variety of other classes. But I think that, how would you show a priest? Maybe by his garb, but if he's carrying an object, maybe it's a scepter or something. But I think that bag, at least in Mesoamerica and perhaps beyond, is the bag of herbs and special things. I know Maya shamans today, or day keepers, who walk around with very similar bags, and inside their bags are corn, seeds, beans, and crystals. And somebody asks them to divine what's wrong with them or what they should do. They pull that bag out and they do a little reading for them. I think that in that context, when somebody's making an art program that's showing important people in the city, in the same way that the spear denotes the warrior, the bag denotes the priest or, magician, shaman, whatever you want to call them. There's this cool place in Chichen Itza called the Temple of 1,000 Columns. There aren't 1,000. There's like a couple hundred. But right in front of the Temple of the Warriors are these rectangular columns that on all four sides are depicting someone standing in the colonnade. And some of them are warriors and some are these guys with robes and bags. And I think that they're making a direct comparison of, here are the priests and the warriors of this temple. And I think the bag, and at least in that context, is denoting the person's profession.
And what about like at Göbekli Tepe, which, 11,000 years ago, very similar handbags?
I theorize that it might be denoting the same sort of thing. Göbekli Tepe is so neat. I'm just an armchair quarterback on that one. I've never been there. I've studied it. I like it. I love seeing all the things that are coming out. I love the evolution of like one circular place that we called Göbekli Tepe. Now we've got this whole thing called Tas Tepler. I love seeing this stuff. And I think, it's a perfect example, to invoking Graham Hancock as well. We didn't know that existed. We did find something that was amazingly old and amazingly sophisticated that we never thought was there, just in my lifetime.
Right. Well, that's why it's so important not to confuse beliefs with fact or theory with truth. It's like we're going to continue to find this stuff. I mean, White Sands, the footprints at White Sands in North America, 22,000 years old. All of a sudden, everybody's wrong. Everybody who was like so dogmatically convinced that no Clovis first, nobody in North America prior to 12,000 years ago. Well, all of a sudden, that's all that was bullshit.
there have been studies that came up with dates that the field generally rejected throughout time.
So could that same thing be happened with the Olmec,
Well, I feel like there were pretty thorough excavations. Yeah. At least in those contexts.
Yes. But we felt like that before white sands was discovered too,
Well, I think those are apples and oranges.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't dig white sands up for decades and then suddenly find that. It was a park that they were looking at, and they knew about those prints for a while, but we didn't have a technique to date them until this time.
Yeah. I guess the only point is
carbon-14 went through a bit of a revolution. I guess it was maybe in the 1990s. We got AMS dating, accelerated mass spectrometry dating. It used to be at the start of carbon-14, we needed like a Super Bowl size chunk of carbon at least to be able to date it. Now we can date like a pin, like a pinhead, and get a date off of it. And so the evidence there at White Sands, we could have never gotten at those dates with the original carbon-14. That was an AMS date.
Right.
And many of them. And even then, I'm still kind of sitting on the edge of my chair to see whether somebody's going to clap back. So beautiful, these things. There's one of them where you can see a woman's walking along, and every couple hundred feet, she puts down her kid because they're heavy, and they walk beside her. You're a parent, you know that thing about how they're like, my hip's numb. Yeah. Walk on your own for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I know my wife's feeling. I don't know. I don't carry my kids. But.
There was a thing, these... Yeah, what am I talking about?
Kidding, yep. Just kidding. It's a joke. No, it's another, point on stay open-minded, and like don't get into this dogma and don't like push the story that we think that we know about our history because we piece together so many little pieces of the puzzle to create a truth, then all of a sudden something like White Sands comes up and it's like, oh, well, there goes all of that.
And here we find ourselves. And I personally, I look forward to us being that wrong.
Right.
I want that to happen.
Yeah.
I want us to break the paradigms. Yeah. If not, what the hell am I doing? Am I just a librarian?
Yeah. Well, you don't have to be wrong.
Not that there's anything wrong with librarians.
Yeah. I think that's part of the problem is that we don't have to be wrong or right. We that's what the ego does, right? It attaches to this is my opinion. This is I'm right and prove me wrong. Well, that's a problem. That type of approach is a problem. But if we can stay open-minded and say, I think that there's a % chance that even if it's a 99% chance, at least you're still remaining open-minded to the possibility that something else is. There's some people in your field, the dogs that bark very loud, that are at 100% and 0% on every topic, and that's it's very destructive. It's very bad for just learning and progressing and moving forward and being open to new ideas and open to the truth. If we're doing dig sites and we already know we're at 100 and we're at 0 on everything in our mind, we shouldn't be digging anything up. We should be waiting until we have some open-minded people that can come to those sites and start digging them up.
Yeah, and it's part of it is economics too. There's not a lot of money in it. I will admit that there's a number of places that I'm happy they got excavated, but the way they got excavated is a professor ran a field school there. It's like, okay, great. So this magnificent archaeological site was the sandbox for know-nothing students who dug it up. That's great.
Yeah,
like
right.
it's not a learning lab.
Yeah.
It's and these things happen all the time. And archaeology in economics terms produces neither guns nor butter. It's really hard to find funding for it, and oftentimes the guys that find funding are the loud blowhard people who intimidated it out of people's pockets, and then then all of a sudden there's a blowhard in charge.
Sure.
That sucks.
Right. Yeah. Ryan, can you pull up, what was the temple that we were looking at with Mike Collins' Wandering Wolf? Was that Chichen Itza?
It was. I'm pulling that up right now.
we were looking. It was interesting because we were talking with Mike about like some of these ancient sites and temples that are, that we think that today we look at and we say, well, this was it. This is what it looked like. But in actuality, the amount of restoration that has gone into these sites to make them and rebuilding, it's like the pause of the Sphinx today. They look nothing like what in a lot of places around the world just look. We don't really know what they would have looked like, but we know that it didn't look like what it did today.
It is that is another frustrating place where I don't know where I stand. There's a line, definitely. We don't want to be making anything up, right? But on the other hand, the swing of the pendulum the other way is let's just glue it together like it looks now. And then it looks like a pile of rocks, like there's Chichen Itza right there. Down on the bottom left is what it looks like today. There's what it looked like before excavation started. That's probably the superstructure of it we're seeing. But you don't want, we reconstruct them so people can appreciate the achievements of these people. And if we just glue together their ruins, that doesn't achieve that purpose. We might as well leave it buried. So, I don't want to make stuff up, but I also don't want to leave it, like right now, a lot of the conservative archaeologists in Mexico, they have a rule now, like, if that stone does not exist now, we cannot replace it. And we can only, we like the word reconstruction is politically incorrect. Nobody should reconstruct anything. The word is consolidation. But what it ends up doing is making these just lumpy, crappy buildings. They clean it all off, and the average Joe that walks through there with the goal of appreciating it is like, well, that's a pile of rocks. I can see why we defeated these people. But so there's got to be a balance there. And I think that right now the pendulum swung too far one way. There are logical, like, symmetry arguments we can make. Like if we have a staircase that's 7 meters tall, and we've got the bottom 3 meters, and each one of those steps are 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters, I feel like we can logically say the rest of these stairs are going to be 10 by 10. Let's do the math and bring in some stone and rebuild it. I know that the roots destroyed the original stone and it's not there anymore. But if we're going to reconstruct it, or we're going to, present it to the public as it used to look, let's use all those clues.
Right. Yeah. It's, are you familiar with the reconstruction at that site specifically, and like what it looked like before and after? Chichen Itza?
I don't know whether I'm completely, that we're focused here on the building called the Castillo. I feel like they did a pretty good job on that for the whole. And the thing that was different about that building is that the Maya never forgot it. It was still, there were still ceremonies going on and around that building at contact, and it never got terribly overgrown again. That's about the extent of the overgrowth. So that particular building was in pretty good shape, and it has a obvious Maya adherence to symmetry that was used, I think, to good effect. Now that I've laid my opinion out, let's see what the what the real story is. Am I wrong in my thinking?
I don't know. The thing that was mind-blowing about this one for me was that if it was rebuilt from scratch, which they're saying that it was, that snake that appears on the spring equinox, and like that potentially could have not existed at the time that this pyramid was originally in existence, was originally constructed, and like, was that snake head at the bottom actually even there?
It was there.
It was
at least that snake head. Okay. I know I've seen old black and whites of the times of what's that nutty guy's name? Le Planchon. before they did any of the reconstruction at all. They excavated. Those guys back in the day, they did very little in the way of reconstruction. They just excavated and exposed things. So those heads were for sure there, and only on that side, and pointing towards the cenote.
Okay. And so would the shadow that is created on the equinox have been there at that point in time?
I believe so. I believe here's what happens in a building like that. As it starts falling apart and trees grow up on it, the stuff above starts rolling down the staircase and the sides of the temple, and it creates this talus on the very bottom of the building that protects that bottom of the building really nicely. So whereas the higher you get up on the building, the more destroyed, and you're just seeing its rubble core. But that first facade from the top falls and protects the bottom.
Okay.
So as long as we are right about the symmetry, I believe the excavations. There's I think that's in the time of Le Planchon. See that little guy? Look at all the talus coming behind him. Nobody's reconstructed that yet. There's the stairs. They're digging. They probably dug to this point and took off. He should be looking at this is one of the balustrades. You can see the width of the balustrade there from relation to the terraces and the steps. And behind him should be the second snake. It's buried under that talus. They haven't excavated that side yet.
Good. So that makes me feel a little bit better than that.
Yes, I've been part of these excavations, and I always, I'm always like, okay, well, we got to start with removing the talus from the base. Let's see what the intact part of the building looks like, and whether we can assume symmetry or not. Luckily for us, the Maya did love them some symmetry. So more often than not, they made symmetrical things, and when they were asymmetrical, it meant something. They were trying to show like the other world, chaos.
Right. Yeah, the part that I didn't understand when we recorded that episode and that I couldn't really understand, even talking to it with Mike and with Ryan, was that if they just reconstructed the thing from scratch and the snakehead didn't exist, then it would have just been a complete coincidence that they accidentally constructed this temple that and put a snakehead at the bottom, not even knowing that a snake would appear on the spring equinox. Like it's almost just impossible that it wouldn't have existed.
The snake on the spring equinox, it's not as fantastic as I wish it was. It's, you oftentimes see just a freeze frame of its body being, it's the shadow of the corner of the terraces that are shining on the balustrade, and slowly over time. Have you ever been there and seen it?
No, but I've seen videos.
The phenomena begins about 2:00 in the afternoon, and it runs till about, actually 5 is about as long as I ever hang there, because then the guards start blowing the whistles, get out of the sight. But it's talked about as the undulating body of a snake exactly on the equinox, but when you're actually there, it's kind of underwhelming. It's, sure, I can see the snake body. There it is, I guess. But is that the only interpretation? Is that possibly a coincidence? Maybe. I used to know I still know him, but he's no longer the director of Chichen Itza. Eduardo Perez was the director, and he would get up on the top of this thing every equinox with a microphone, say, "Thank you, everyone, so much for being here at Chichen Itza. We are so welcome. Happy to have you. Welcome. By the way, in my opinion, this is all just a coincidence and this is nonsense. Enjoy your day." Like, Eduardo, why you got to be such a buzzkill, all these people?
That you don't think that's impressive?
I do, but I don't think I don't think it's the only interpretation. I mean, maybe they intended it to be a snake. Maybe we're just seeing clouds. I mean, again, it gets back to I wish we could actually ask a Maya.
But there's a snake.
No Maya.
There's a snake head at the bottom.
Sure, there are snake heads all over the site. There's a smaller version of this building called the Osiris, And it's got snake heads too, but they're not pointing in any direction. Their balustrade doesn't do this.
So what percent?
This is not nearly the only snake heads at the site.
What percent chance do you think that this is coincidence and an accident?
50-50.
Really? Wow.
I mean, I've got some other things. It's disappointing, but I am a scientist and I am trying to, be skeptical, not hopeful. I have spent a lot of my career as an archaeoastronomer disproving things that I was hoping that I read in literature and I thought were true. This one in particular, it's not as impressive as you think.
And could
some of the things I did in Palenque, they're much more tighter parameters. Tighter beams of light, exactly at dawn, exactly at dusk. Another problem I have with this one is that it starts at 2:00 in the afternoon and stops at 5. General pattern for ancient astronomy is employing either first light, last light, or perhaps noon. This one just falls at a weird time and it drags on for an hour and a half, 2 hours.
But could it be potentially less spectacular today because the place was completely rebuilt from scratch? I mean, perhaps it was extraordinarily spectacular before we rebuilt it.
The orientation of the building should still be true. Even if they messed up the steps or some of the terraces, the overall orientation of the building, we have an interior phase that is also that same exact orientation. So we have a double confirmation, the exterior and the interior phase, as a confirmation of its orientation. So it does line up with equinox.
No doubt the alignment is going to be the same. I totally understand that, but the shape and the structure of the components of the exterior walls, of the staircase, of the rails on the staircase could have been curved, it could have been extraordinarily spectacular back in its day.
Honestly, I have looked through a lot of these old black and white reports of Chichen Itza, especially. I don't know every site that well, but I know Chichen Itza pretty well, and this is honestly the first time I've ever heard anybody say that it was significantly wrongly put together. Look at that top right one. That is before any excavations. You still see the shape. You still see the entire superstructure and its roof.
Nobody said it was significantly wrongly put together.
Well, sorry, then I misunderstood you.
Yeah. No, but just that it was completely rebuilt from...
It's got a lot of neat numerology in it, too, which, again, might just be, wrong ideas that appeal to me. But I love that, each one of the steps on the 4 staircases, and that's a pattern for the post-classic all around Mesoamerica. It's not a one-off building. In fact, not even at this site. But each one of those steps it's 91 steps up to the top. And then the top platform that they all connect to is the last one for a total of 365 steps. And the niches on each one of the terraces are 9 terraces, another Maya number, and the niches in them, if you count them all up around the building, are 52. There's neat Maya numerology all over there. And I don't think anybody, modern folks, fudged that. I think that was really there.
Okay.
The Maya loved to hide numerology in their buildings and in their calculations.
That's cool. Yeah, it's a fascinating structure and a fascinating building.
Nowadays, the whole site's a nightmare.
Oh, good. Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
I get the 365, right? 52.
Weeks in a year.
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Years in a cycle.
Okay.
365 day years times 260 day years, which is the sacred and the solar calendar. If you use those two, run them concurrently, they'll only hit the same conjuncted day every 52 years. The Aztecs did what was called the new fire ceremony every 52 years, where they'd burn down perfectly good temples and renew the world. For Maya, we call it a calendar round. But 52 years is a incredibly significant time period for all of Mesoamerica.
Is there any, which I did not know that because my mind went to 52 weeks in a year, which is, was thinking of the dates, like they're not even remotely close in terms of when that calendar was developed. And,
Nope.
And so that leads me to a follow-up question, if that's okay. Is there any correlation between the 52-year cycle and the 52-week calendar?
Not that I'm aware of, because the Mesoamerica did not have weeks. They had they did have months in a solar year, but there were 18 months of 20 days each, and then a 19th month of just 5 days called the Yeb, for a total of 365. They were tracking the sun just like every other culture, but they decided to divide it by their base number system, 20. We are decimal people, right?
We left over, might as well make it a month.
The Egyptians, I think, had the same challenge. They got to that 360 and like, well, I mean, we know it's 5 days more. Should we do with this? They were nicer about it. I think they had like festivals and positively embraced it. The Maya were freaked out by it. The Yeb is a terrible time where you should stay home and not have any projects. Don't travel. Don't have sex with your wife. Just be cool until these 5 days are over, because anything could happen.
Did you say they were base 20?
Yeah. Vigesimal, it's called. Like we're decimal. They're vigesimal.
Yeah, we're base
10. So
10.
where we go 1 through 9, and then the next number is a 1 and a 0, they go 1 through 19, and the next number is a 1 and a 0.
So they counted fingers and toes, where we generally count fingers. That's our base 10.
That's one that people often say, but I think that's kind of one of those little microaggressions against indigenous people.
Okay. I never heard that they were, I thought
they
olives...
were too dumb to wear shoes.
No.
So they could see their toes.
I honestly thought all of humanity was base 10.
I didn't. I'm not accusing you of anything, Ryan.
Yeah.
It's on the internet all the time. It's base 20 because they used their toes as well. That could be true, but that's conjecture.
Oh, that's why. Okay. I had a conversation with Matt a couple of weeks ago talking about the book I referenced earlier, and was commenting about, different species may use bases depending on how many digits they have. I never knew that base 20 was a thing. I thought everyone used base 10. So
the really wacky one is the Babylonians. Base 60.
What?
What the hell?
It's just gonna make things hard.
Base 60, yeah. All of those cuneiform tablets, when people are doing the math to see what date they're talking about, it's all base 60. That's why our calendar, or why our clock is 12. It's an increment of 60.
Well, thank y'all for letting me jump in. I heard 52 and it was right there with Matt, like, it's weeks in a year.
That's the first thing that came into my head, and then I just moved right past it. Yeah, but what was the 9? The 9 was the one that I...
9's a funny one. It's definitely there's one Maya cycle that's on a typical monument that is a revolution of 9 days, like a 9-day week. We call it the 9 Lords of the Night. I've been hunting for any explanation as to why 9 forever, and I've never really found a satisfying one. One time in the highlands of Guatemala, when I was talking to daykeeper priests about the nature of the 20 days of the sacred calendar, each one of them have their own character, and I'm born on a day, you're born on a day, just like our Greek horoscopes. Your personality and destiny are set by the day that you were born. And those days have spirits, and those spirits, some of them get along great, some of them don't. Every 5, like there's groups of 4 that if you count by 5s through the 20, those 4, they're pretty nice. Just like we say, like, oh, Taurus and Scorpio get along great. The Maya had a similar thing. But I asked one time, what about 9? Like, I just asked a daykeeper priest, why 9? Does 9 mean anything to you? He said, well, your protector spirit, if you are... Keeb, I was Keeb. He said, if you want to know your 2 protector nawals or moms, count 9 days one way and 9 days another way from your day. And those are the kind of guardian angel spirits that people of your day have. That was fascinating. I don't know where to go with that, but he had that's what 9 meant to him.
Okay. Interesting. Well, what did we miss? What are, you probably got to roll out of here pretty soon.
The mysteries are job security in my line of work. There's a lot I hope we're missing a whole lot. I look forward to being part of some of that.
For sure. Yeah. I mean,
so we're wrapping up. Let's see. We didn't talk about North America at all, which I think of as, at least in my trajectory of learning, the most astounding thing, that North America actually had a history akin to South America and Mesoamerica, and we are in, a kind of, amnesia is not the word, but generation after generation have kind of swept it under the rug until it disappeared. But there are pyramids in North America, big ones, and people don't know they exist. And there are massive, complex civilizations that went on centuries, sometimes millennia, before European contact. And I wish that we could get to a place where we could just accept that as part of our history. I think that we have in the modern America, we kind of have this shame complex that, we did North American Indians dirty. We could have handled that differently. And, the diseases were a terrible thing, but so was our behavior. So we don't like to talk about that. But I think we can just vault that time. I have a dream of taking all this knowledge that I've accumulated over my lifetime and put it into a textbook that can be taught alongside other American history in high school. I know that the contact period is so unsavory for everybody. I think we just don't talk about it. I think, the textbook that I'm dreaming of making, that I have already outlines and things, I just got to figure out a financial support for it. It'll end at the year 1500. Just before Europe really takes hold, and we can just talk about all these wonderful civilizations. I think it deserves its place in ancient history, and we, as the inhabitants of this land, we should know these things. Just on a knowledge-based thing. It makes absolutely no sense that we see all these great civilizations all around the planet, and somehow North America was just a blank slate waiting for us to inhabit it. That's not true. The reasons that we swept it under the rug are understandable at contact, but we're past that. I would love to be part of this generation of kids growing up knowing, the deeper history of the land we stand on, and not in a, reparations kind of way. We don't have to discuss the terrible end of all that and the transition to appreciate the things that came before.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, my mind's going in 4 different directions right now. But the pyramids, where are they, and when were they built? Who built them?
Well, one really big one that's out in the open and nobody ever looks at it is Cahokia. Cahokia is a 100+ foot tall pyramid covering an area of multiple football fields, and it is 10 miles outside of St. Louis, Missouri. You cross the Mississippi, and here's this giant city that actually had a population of 30,000 people. It's one big pyramid. Monk's Mound is the one that I was just talking about. But there's an entire city of smaller pyramids. It had a huge palisade around it. There's Monk's Mound. And, nowadays it looks like a grass hill. But in the past, it had a cap, and it had terraces. It's huge.
It had an interior?
Not an interior. No, not like Egyptian pyramids. Nothing in North America or Mesoamerica really had interiors like that.
I guess there would be that we know about
previous
right?
phases.
Could have squashed it.
There's like the Tomb of Pakal, that one, but even that was that's a rarity. We found that in the 1950s, and we thought, we're onto it. It's going to be just like Egypt. We're 70 years later. We never found another. Most of them are rubble core. This one, like the Mesoamerican ones, has 3 or 4 phases as it built up to this height. But so you got this one. This one was built about 950 CE, and it dies out about 1100. The city does, Cahokia. But it starts Mississippian civilization, where pyramids are built from the Mississippi all the way to the East Coast. There are ones around here. There's still the India, but we call them mounds. And it disparages what they were in their pristine height.
Yeah, these mounds that exist within Florida, like I've heard Luke talk about them. We're going to talk about it. He's going to come back next month, in a couple of weeks, actually. Where do those exist? And I guess those, they could be anywhere and everywhere throughout the state of Florida. And if they existed and a developer buys the land, they're just going to bulldoze that down, and we're never going to know that it existed, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And I'm sure that's
a lot of them have
millions
been. A lot of them. There were big ones in the Tampa Bay area. There's still a couple of them, and they're funny too. There's mounds that are shell mounds, and those are from the Archaic period. Those are thousands of years old, but they're huge shell mounds that then eventually get capped, and today their core has been revealed as just a pile of shells. And then there's the ones made out of earth that come later in the Mississippian period. Not that long a drive from here, you could get to Moundville in Alabama, just near Tuscaloosa, named after a Mississippian king. You could go to Etowah in Georgia, another huge pyramids. Now, the oldest one is in the bayous of northern Louisiana. It's called Poverty Point, and it's amazing. The city had at least 5,000 people living in it, and its main pyramid was built by 1500 BCE. Really, at 1700 is the start of it. Huge, old, and it's got these amazing arced terraces out in front of the main pyramid that we can see there were houses on these terraces. It almost looks like a opera theater's stages. See that curve there and the big mound? That's 3,000 years old, standing in the bayous of Louisiana.
Right. Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, we got to get you going, man. You've got a plane to catch.
All right.
Yeah.
I've had fun.
Me too.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
I've learned a lot. Yeah. It's been a great conversation.
It's been a pleasure to meet you. Luke's always spoken very highly about you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Agreed. Yep. Well, very good. We'll get you on the way. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate your time, and I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.